Welcome to today's hearing, Keeping the Lights On, examining the state of regional grid reliability. Today, we will continue the subcommittee's work to address the ongoing electric reliability crisis facing our nation. The witnesses before us are each of the regional grid operators and ERCOT, who collectively cover 2/3 of the country. These organizations are charged with overseeing reliability of their state or region, administering markets for the sale and purchase of electricity products, and coordinating transmission development. While each grid operator functions in a similar manner, they all take unique approaches to addressing the regional and demographic differences of communities and their footprints. But no matter where in the country they serve, they are confronting the challenges facing our power sector. It's no secret that our country is in the midst of a reliability crisis, and it could not come at a worse time. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, recently stated that 52 gigawatts of generation will retire in the next 4 years. To put this into context, that is the rough equivalent of 40 nuclear plants or 500 square miles of solar panels. While dangerous amounts of baseload generation are leaving the grid, we're facing historic levels of demand entering the system and interconnection queues that are backlogged with intermittent resources and battery storage facilities. We know that renewables are not a one-on-one replacement for dispatchable baseload power that is essential to reliability and provides spinning reserves needed to stabilize the system through fluctuations. It is not clear that the pace at which baseload generation is coming online will bridge the gap of retiring supply and meet increasing demands over the next few short years. As we are well aware, these new demands are largely driven by developments in artificial intelligence and domestic manufacturing. Achieving a leadership position in the development of AI and reshoring domestic manufacturing is not a pipe dream to strive for. It is a national security imperative that could shape America's future in the global economy. Regional grid operators before us today are on the front lines of a reliability crisis, and this is a new era of historic electricity demand. When operating correctly, electricity markets should allow clear market signals to drive investment into new generation. Efficient interconnection of new resources should address increasing demand, and coordinated transmission planning should bring needed electricity supplies to growing load centers. However, these organizations and their electricity markets do not operate in a vacuum. Excessive federal overreach like the Clean Power Plan 2.0 drove significant premature retirements of baseload power and discouraged long-term investment into baseload generation sources. Significant subsidies for intermittent generation undermine the economies of baseload or on-demand dispatchable generation resources that are essential to keeping the lights on. These grid operators are also tasked with the difficult job of maintaining reliability and resource adequacy as states implement restrictive policies designed to attack fossil resources. Because of the interconnected nature of much of our bulk power system, the decisions of one state to drive out baseload power inherently impact the reliability of neighboring states. All these problems are compounded by systematic permitting challenges that make it nearly impossible to develop new infrastructure in large parts of our country. Markets cannot build what governments do not let them do. We need to address these challenges through a pragmatic whole-of-government approach that recognizes the benefits of different fuel sources, the limitation of others, and prioritizes energy expansion. There is a value to ensuring a diverse resource mix, but it's important to recognize that not all electrons should be treated equally. The variability of intermittent resources like wind and solar innately require backup generation during inclement weather conditions and where battery storage facilities are operationally restricted. Often it's during these periods of inclement weather when we need electricity the most to protect the health and safety of our communities. I look forward to today's discussion regarding the ongoing reliability crisis and the important steps regional grid operators are taking to correct market inefficiencies to keep the lights on for all Americans. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and at this time recognize the gentlelady from Florida, the ranking member of the subcommittee, 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Latta, and welcome to our witnesses today. And I want to thank you and everyone working to keep America's power system as modern and as efficient, affordable, and reliable as it can be, from the linemen who were restoring power after the devastating hurricane season in my neck of the woods, to the folks dealing with wildfires, extreme events, and just the new calls for huge new sources of energy and capacity across the country. A resilient and reliable electric grid that utilizes the cleanest resources possible is vital to all Americans. And decade after decade, we've modernized energy sources and the grid, and we must continue to do so. And while I'm pleased that we're focused on strengthening the grid, the hearing ignores the damage being done by the Trump administration and Elon Musk to reliable, affordable energy, including the investments under the infrastructure law and the Clean Energy and Climate Resilience Law, the IRA. Since I started thinking about this hearing, I've had the lyrics from Wicked, that great dance number, stuck in my head, dancing through life. We're dancing through life, no need to tough it when you can slough it off as you do. For example, the early Trump shutdown of grants and loans halted electricity and grid projects, causing chaos and additional costs for co-ops and power producers and ultimately consumers. Then you have the illegal layoffs of energy experts in various agencies, the illegal firings of the Department of Energy Inspector General, and the disruption of electricity trade between Canada and the US. It's all leading to higher costs for American consumers. For instance, the US imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian electricity imports, and Ontario retaliated with a 25% surcharge in electricity exports to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. And although Ontario suspended the surcharge, the tariffs have strained the integrated power grid shared by the two countries. This interconnected system has historically provided reliability and cost benefits, but tariffs now are threatening its efficiency. So I urge colleagues to stand up to this chaos that's fueling higher costs and uncertainties. It's weakened our ability to strengthen the grid. And as Republicans hammer out their tax giveaways to billionaires, it should not come at the expense of grid infrastructure investments and clean energy tax credits for solar, wind, nuclear, and pollution reduction. One analysis predicts that repealing the clean energy tax credits would increase annual energy costs for each U.S. household. It would cost us about 800,000 jobs and decrease our GDP. Solar, wind, and battery storage are the cheapest and cleanest ways to add energy supply to the grid now. They're driving down energy costs now. RTOs, ISOs, and FERC are making progress on interconnection queues, and Congress should help them because we understand there are over 2,000 gigawatts of energy and storage waiting in line. That's equivalent to about $1 billion or 1 billion homes at peak demand. Also, there are many common sense, practical policy solutions to help our grid connect more resources and strengthen the grid. My bicameral Advancing GETS Act is a great example. The bill would encourage FERC to implement shared savings, incentives that promote the deployment of grid-enhancing technologies. That's the cheapest way to supercharge our power grid. It would allow utilities to earn a profit for saving money and save consumers billions on their electricity bills every year. Similarly, the Expediting Generator Interconnection Procedures Act would make common sense reforms to the outdated, sluggish process that we use to bring energy of all kinds onto the grid. We could promote the use of automation and standardization studies, ensuring that grid upgrade costs are fairly allocated to customers who benefit from the interconnection of new resources. The energy affordability crisis we're grappling with today requires real, forward-looking policy solutions. It requires a politically independent and well-staffed FERC, and it requires a consistent commitment to energy policy, one that keeps Americans safe, helps us compete with our foreign adversaries, and continues to deliver investments and jobs across America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Latta, and thank you for the recognition. Thank you for all of our witnesses being here. There's a lot of sayings that I don't see my friend from Michigan in here on our committee this morning, but her husband, a lot of sayings attributed to Chairman Dingell over looking at the globe and say that's the jurisdiction of energy and commerce. Another one is, he always said, for our jurisdiction, if it moves, it's energy. If it's not moving, it's commerce. So that's our jurisdiction. So I use the Dingell corollary. It takes energy to move commerce. And for us to be successful to turn, somebody said the other day that AI turns energy into intelligence. And so it is vitally important that we as a country get together and figure out how we're going to beat China. And it's by having affordable, reliable delivery of electric power. And the complicated question of how to deliver that power effectively is compounded by the tremendous increase in demand projected over coming years for specific purposes like AI and broader increases in consumer demand. I know we've met slower energy growth over the last generation and also more efficiency, which is absolutely part of it, is to be more efficient. But now we're seeing a rising in demand. And so we have to ensure affordable, reliable delivery of power to meet our needs and the tremendous amount of energy it's going to require for the utility grid. So here in Congress, we must identify and understand the forces impacting the ability of engineers to plan and operate this system for better or for worse. And we must address the common sense policy reforms that would allow utilities and operators to do their work cost effectively. Over the past decade, certain federal and state policies have made it more difficult for operators to keep the lights on. The thrust of the Biden administration's electricity policy was to shut down baseload coal and limit natural gas generation with onerous new rules and regulations. During this time, many states also established policies to transition away from fossil generation that is essential for maintaining grid reliability. Momentum behind this so-called transition continues just as a generational increase in power demand is emerging. Consider how new demand growth is clashing with the residual Biden-Harris policies today. In December, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, projected peak power demand to grow by 151 gigawatts over the next 10 years. Over the same period, NERC reports expected retirements of dispatchable generation, which is needed for reliability, to be as much as 115 gigawatts. This gap between retirements and growth in demand alone counts over 240 gigawatts, or an equivalent amount of power needed to support 195 million homes over an entire year. Ensuring the availability of reliable power will require stopping and reversing retirements of dispatchable resources and building out new natural gas generation and eventually nuclear and other reliable sources. Yet the vast amount of the new generation that is in line today to connect the grid is intermittent wind and solar, which cannot be relied upon when you need it the most. As a result, half of the nation is at risk of power shortfalls over the next 10 years. Think about it, half the nation. For all the benefits of all the above resource policies, the current path that incentivizes a massive renewable build is putting the electric system out of balance and dramatically increasing risk. Today, we will talk to the grid operators that are caught at the center of the clash between failing policies and strong economic demand affecting our nation's generation mix. They must deal with the consequences. So understanding the challenges you face and how you plan to meet the growing demand is essential for our work. Last week, the Secretary of Energy noted that the existential security implications of our race with China on AI and other advanced technologies. A focus on meeting the China challenges, and with the DeepSeek, that should wake us up that we are challenging China. We can't always expect to be on top if we don't focus on being on top. So that should raise serious questions about what is necessary to clear the way in permitting and regulatory policy, which will enable tremendous energy and power growth in the coming years. Recognize we have to be focused on making sure we do everything in the right way, in sustainable way, as much as we can possible. But we have to fully appreciate the scale of the pace of change coming because of the AI, the data centers, and the demand. spoke with Microsoft. And Microsoft data centers, not all, but some Microsoft data centers can use as much power as the city of Seattle. That puts it into perspective. I look forward to this discussion. I will yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Latta. For the third time this Congress, we've had an important hearing focusing on the reliability and affordability of electricity in this country. And for the third time, my Republican colleagues are going to purposely ignore the fact they're attempting to repeal the single biggest incentive to build electricity capacity in this country, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act. Repealing billions of dollars in technology-neutral funding for all types of new energy is not the way you address the increasing need for energy. It also ignores the fact that the Trump administration is freezing federal funding and trying to rescind grants for grid reliability projects that the grid operators sitting before us today have said are vital to addressing increasing energy demand. It also ignores the fact that President Trump is attempting to put tariffs on electricity imports from Canada, which could seriously drive up energy costs for people in the Midwest and the Northeast. It's time that we recognize that the chaotic and constantly changing policies of Trump and Elon Musk are the single greatest threat right now to grid reliability. Just last week, yet another study came out, this time from Energy Innovation, showing that repealing the Inflation Reduction Act would increase American families' power bills. Republicans are talking about the importance of affordability, but their actions don't match their words. Despite continued Republican attacks on our grid's reliability and affordability, today's hearing is still important. Regional grid operators play a critical role in keeping the lights on for our customers. And 27 years ago, FERC Order 888 brought competition to electricity markets around the country. Since that time, the competition encouraged by these markets has broadly lowered wholesale energy prices and made the grid cleaner, all while ensuring reliability. But that's not guaranteed. And I'm worried that some of the rules of the road that govern regional transmission organizations could start to harm consumers. Last year, partially as a result of poor market design, capacity prices in the PJM region exploded from $29 to $270 per megawatt day. And these price increases aren't abstract, they are directly responsible for a roughly $25 per month increase in New Jersey power bills that my constituents will start feeling this June. So, Mr. Astana, I want to be clear. This is completely unacceptable. PJM's years of dragging its feet on reforming its capacity markets and interconnection queue are finally coming home to roost, but it's my constituents who are stuck paying the bill. PJM has demonstrated a complete inability to connect resources to the grid in a timely fashion. And I recognize that PJM has taken a number of steps in the last few years to rectify this, but frankly, it's too little too late. The years of inaction have already taken their toll. A recent report found that if PJM had implemented proactive transmission planning and simplified interconnection processes years ago, it could have avoided half of these costs. And I'm frustrated that PJM is touting its progress in connecting more energy to its grid when it still has not fully complied with FERC's requirements under Order 2023. Meanwhile, PJM is spending my constituents' ratepayer dollars, suing FERC over Order 2023, creating further uncertainty for potential developers of power plants. And Mr. Astanza, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, your organization simply must get its act together. I appreciate that PJM has introduced some short-term tweaks to its market, and it's working together with states, including New Jersey, to find a pathway to protect ratepayers, but this all should have been figured out years ago. And as we continue this discussion today, it's important we recognize that in this time of increased demand for electricity, families are increasingly at risk of their power bills becoming unaffordable. Grid operators and, frankly, FERC must remember that they have a legal obligation to ensure that their policies are just and reasonable, and anything else does a disservice to the American people who depend on you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and this now concludes member opening statements. The chair reminds members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. We want to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today and taking time to testify before the subcommittee. Each witness will have the opportunity to give an opening statement, followed by a round of questions from the members. Our witnesses today are, Manu Ashtana, the President and CEO of PJM Interconnection, LLC. Mr. Gordon Van Wiley, President and CEO of Independent Service Operator of New England. Ms. Jennifer Curran, the Senior Vice President for Planning and Operations at Mid-Continent Independent Service Operator. Mr. Richard Dewey, President and CEO of New York Independent System Operator. Mr. Lanny Nickel, the Chief Operating Officer of Southwest Power Pool. Mr. Elliot Mainzer, the President and CEO of California Independent System Operator. And Mr. Pablo Vegas, the President and CEO of the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT. Again, we appreciate all of our witnesses for being with us today. And before we get started, just a quick reminder about our light system in front of you. You'll have 5 minutes to give an opening statement. At 4 minutes, you'll get a yellow light, meaning you have 1 minute remaining. Red light signifies your time is up. So if you please wrap up when you see the red light come on. Also, just pull the mic up close to you as you're speaking. And this time we will begin before us today, Mr. Ashtana. You have 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Thanks again for being with us today.
Yeah, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Castor, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. Good morning. My name is Manu Asthana. I am the CEO of PJM Interconnection. PJM works to ensure the reliable flow of power to 67 million people across 13 states and DC. We serve about 1 in 5 Americans. We're fully regulated by the FERC. As you know, FERC plays a critical leadership role in our industry. And the value of having a fully staffed, well-functioning federal regulator, particularly at this time, cannot be understated. We don't have a profit motive. Our core mission is grid reliability. Our work, along with that of our member companies, has ensured a strong and stable grid for almost a century since our founding in 1927. More recently, however, we have seen 3 notable trends I wanted to share with you that concern us. First, dispatchable thermal generation is retiring, often driven by federal or state policy. Second, most of our interconnection queue is made up of intermittent renewable generation. And I want to be clear, these generators play an important role on the grid, and we want them to come online. But they are not a one-for-one substitute for the machines that they're replacing. Finally, third, electrical demand is growing, driven primarily by data center load growth. Less supply, more demand, it adds up to increased reliability risk and higher prices. And we're seeing this across large parts of our country. This is not just a PJM phenomenon. Our industry has been working hard on solutions. Specifically in PJM, amongst other things, we have reformed our generator interconnection process. We had a queue of about 200,000 megawatts of generation. We have whittled that down to 67,000 megawatts, an incredible amount of progress. With another 50,000 megawatts through the queue, ready to go, and actually parts of it have started to construct, and some has already come online. We have opened new pathways for generators to connect to the grid, and we have implemented reforms to our market rules. And the good news is, these initiatives are having an impact. I am happy to report several generators have withdrawn their retirement decisions. We have a shuttered nuclear power plant that has announced its return and is working hard to come back. Pennsylvania's former largest coal plant is being studied to come back to life as a gas generator. Demand response providers are looking for ways to bring more supply onto the system, and developers are working hard to bring their projects to market. In fact, just last week, one of the new pathways to interconnection that I talked about resulted in almost 27,000 megawatts of new generation applying to interconnect to PJM, which is very exciting. But our work is not done. It still takes roughly 18 months to build a data center. It takes 5 years plus to build a power plant. And global supply chains for grid components like transformers and turbines are backlogged. The stakes are high, and we remain committed to the task at hand. In our opinion, we have 6 key areas of focus for the industry looking forward, and I wanted to share them with you. First, we must keep the supply that we have today. More retirements are going to make it much harder for us to serve this load growth. Second, we must try to bring back what we can from retirement, whether in its current form or a repowered form with a different fuel, or using those sites for different generators. Third, we need to connect new generators rapidly, and that includes uprates of existing generators. Fourth, we need to harness demand flexibility, which I think is a real hidden opportunity. Fifth, we do need siting and permitting reforms for generation and transmission, and we could use help with that. And finally, more investment in natural gas infrastructure is needed to support power generation flexibility. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your opening statement. Mr. Van Welle, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Castor, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. Like other regions, New England's electric system is undergoing an energy transition. Historically, power system planning is focused on having enough resources. We refer to this as resource adequacy. However, as we transition to more weather-dependent resources, one of the biggest challenges facing New England is making sure that there's sufficient energy in the system to meet expected electricity growth. The wholesale markets run by ISO New England effectively price supply and demand conditions, providing important signals to developers when investment is needed. However, the wholesale markets alone cannot assure resource adequacy. State and federal policies also play a key role in achieving regional resource adequacy. While the wholesale markets operate on shorter timeframes, the states have the ability to structure longer-term commitments through various hedging strategies to incentivize the development of sufficient resources to meet the resource adequacy standard that is priced in our capacity market. Moreover, the states have the ability to address barriers to entry for resources participating in the wholesale electricity markets. These longer-term commitments can also protect consumers against price volatility in both the energy and the capacity markets. In short, the ISO and the New England states have a joint and complementary role in achieving resource adequacy. Furthermore, investor confidence in the wholesale markets is dependent on a supportive policy and regulatory framework at both the state and the federal level. As a region, New England has made progress in evolving the market design to align with the resources that are coming forward. We are implementing new approaches to plan the transmission system to meet the state's policy objectives, and we have new tools to help us better quantify reliability risks in a rapidly changing power system across the region. Incentivized by state policies, the region has invested heavily in energy efficiency and behind-the-meter solar resources, which have effectively reduced demand for electricity from the grid operated by ISO New England. These investments, coupled with relatively little interest from data centers and other AI-driven activities, has meant that New England has thus far not seen the rapid growth in consumer demand forecasted in other regions. The reliability and market outlook for the near term is favorable, though potential challenges lie ahead. Our latest 10-year forecast projects regional electricity consumption will increase by about 17% over the next decade. It remains to be seen whether that load growth will outpace the net effect of generator retirements and new supply coming online. It is difficult to build new grid-scale energy infrastructure in New England, and recent developments give us cause for concern about the region staying on pace with maintaining resource and energy adequacy as load grows. This may have implications towards the end of this decade. Due to recent federal executive actions, New England is facing new uncertainty about the timing of offshore wind development, which has been planned as a major new domestic source of energy for our region. As of January, battery storage and wind resources make up the largest proposals in our interconnection queue at 47% and 45% respectively. There are currently no other categories of resources proposed at that scale, and this could have implications in both the near and the short term. The current deliberations about new tariffs on imports have the potential to affect not only the price of electricity in New England, but also the availability of power to England from our long-standing electricity trading partners in Eastern Canada. This could also have implications in both the near and the long term. As demand grows for electricity in New England, the region will need new resources to meet resource adequacy needs, and it will be critical to ensure that we have a supportive policy and regulatory framework in place to allow for the entry of those resources. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your statement. And Ms. Curran, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Latta, Ranking Member Castor, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jennifer Curran, Vice President of Operations and Planning for the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, as we are more commonly known. It's a pleasure to be here today as you consider the state of regional grid reliability and its impact on our nation. I hope MISO's experiences and insights will be helpful as you continue your work on this. MISO serves over 45 million customers in a territory that spans all or part of 15 states. We created in 2024 alone $5 billion in value for the region. That in turn has an impact on costs for consumers in the region. Unlike some other RTOs in MISO, our utilities and load-serving entities are the ones with the responsibility for resource adequacy. We work closely with them to ensure that there is an accurate picture of the evolving and current resource risks that exist, so that as they make their investment decisions, they can be better informed. We are fuel source and policy neutral in MISO. That means we do not advocate, prefer, or favor any kind of fuel type or electric policy. Instead, we work to implement state and federal policies and the goals and objectives of our members. That doesn't mean, of course, that we're disinterested observers. Reliability of the bulk electric system is our mission, and that's the topic today. As we consider the energy landscape, I think we've already talked about a number of the factors, and MISO is no different. We see rapid retirement of existing resources, significant growth of non-carbon emitting resources, many of which do not have the same attributes in terms of duration of operation as those retiring resources, and of course load growth driven not just by data centers, but also the reshoring of manufacturing into the US. We've been following and working to get ahead of these issues for a number of years through an initiative we call the Reliability Imperative. Over the last several years, we've made a number of changes, including instituting changes to how we accredit generation resources. That's how we determine how they will perform during those most high-risk hours and gives us all a more accurate picture of the resource adequacy picture. We're updating our markets. Things like market pricing signals to ensure that we're sending the right signal to incent generation output during the times of the tightest operating conditions. Over the past few years, we've approved over $30 billion of new regional transmission lines that will substantially improve electric transfer capability across the region and ensure electric reliability and the associated economic growth. We, like others, have instituted a number of improvements to the generator interconnection queue process to hasten the approval of generation, and we're currently seeking approval at FERC for something we call the Expedited Resource Addition Study. That study is a temporary framework to provide an ability to expedite certain new generation projects that are desperately needed to meet resource adequacy and reliability risks. But much more work remains to be done. One of the easiest approaches is to slow down the retirement of the existing resources. We need to keep as many of the resources as we have online until adequate replacements are in place to ensure that we are able to continue to provide customers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But that doesn't mean we can slow down investment in new infrastructure. We need to continue at a very rapid pace the development of new generation resources of all types to serve that growing electricity need, and we need to ensure that we're investing in the transmission assets that are needed to deliver that energy to where it is needed. Finally, we need to continue to work on process reforms to ensure that our markets and planning processes enable the changes to meet the changes we need in the future. Things like the expedited resource adequacy study that I mentioned, things like ensuring that we have the right accreditation for demand side and other resources, the addition of market products and the like are all going to be important to our future. MISO's extensive analytical work and operational experience make it clear that no single electric generating resource type, transmission line, new technology, or process change is going to solve all of our problems on its own. It's a multifaceted problem that is going to take a coordinated approach that leverages all of these tools. I appreciate your attention to these vital issues, and I look forward to working with Congress and federal and state regulators to ensure a reliable electric system.
Well, thank you for your opening statement. And Mr. Dewey, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the NISO, I would like to thank Chairman Latta, Vice Chairman Weber, Ranking Member Castor, and Ranking Member Pallone, subcommittee members, staff, and all for the invitation to discuss the state of grid reliability with you today. My name is Rich Dewey. I'm the President and CEO and a 25-year veteran of the New York ISO. My full statement has been filed with your offices, but I want to share a couple of key points with you at the start here. For the past 25 years, New York ISO has operated the New York State power system to the strongest reliability criteria in the nation. In addition to standards enforced by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, we comply with standards by the NPCC, or the Northeast Power Coordinating Council, as well as the New York State Reliability Council, which is specific to New York. We are champions of the essential role that the power grid plays in preserving the health and safety of New Yorkers and powering our modern economy. It is our #1 priority. In addition, or in filling this role, we perform essential planning studies that are continuously monitored to ensure reliability, and we administer wholesale electricity markets that allow for the most efficient scheduling and solutions to meet the reliability needs for consumers, which is a critical piece. In New York State today, primarily driven by public policy, and like many other parts of the country, the power system is rapidly transitioning to a cleaner supply resources. This transition presents significant challenges because firm dispatchable generation, primarily powered by fossil fuels, is being replaced by intermittent wind and solar and storage resources that are dependent on the weather. At the same time, demand is growing significantly due to the electrification of the economy and welcome economic development and manufacturing. More than twice as much legacy generation has been retired in recent years as the entry of this new supply. In my filed comments in these remarks, I'm going to highlight how our planning processes and how our markets position us to tackle these challenges. From a planning perspective, we have a comprehensive reliability planning process that examines the future in 3 ways. We do a 20-year scenario-based analysis to show options of how the power system could transform over the next 20 years. We have detailed reliability studies that look for potential reliability violations over a 10-year horizon. And on a quarterly basis, we do short-term assessments to allow us to rapidly react to changing conditions. In short, we are continuously studying the reliability of the grid and are prepared to take actions when it's necessary. Our most recent reliability study, which looks at the 10-year horizon, identifies reliability violations as early as 2033. Acceleration of load growth or unplanned generator retirements could accelerate these deficiencies. Our report also highlighted the increased reliance on electricity in winter, the heightened severity of winter reliability events, the uncertainty of fuel supply, as well as the reliance on a rapidly aging generation fleet. In order to satisfy load growth projections necessary to meet these economic factors, more generation and transmission assets are needed. From a markets perspective, our wholesale electricity markets play a crucial role in delivering reliable outcomes and at the least production cost. Properly designed markets ensure pricing signals attract necessary new resources to the right location, incentivize needed performance response from existing resources, and shift investment risk from consumers. The NISO markets optimize schedules to supply resources to maximize value to consumers, performance from suppliers, and provide the right attributes for reliability. Recent innovative market products at the NISO encourage dynamic scheduling of reserves, encourage flexibility of load through demand response, and signal entry of distributed energy resources and energy storage that will improve the flexibility of the system. This flexibility will be crucial to manage the intermittency inherent in the grid of the future and are important components of the market. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. I look forward to your questions and future dialogue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your opening statement. And Mr. Nickel, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, good morning. Chairman Latta, Vice Chairman Weber, Ranking Member Castor, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning about grid reliability. I am Lanny Nickel. I am currently Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Southwest Power Pool, and I am the incoming CEO as of April 1st. We are a regional grid operator serving 18 million people across 14 states in the central part of our country. We are responsible simply for keeping the lights on today and in the future. Our industry is at an inflection point as it experiences a rate of change I have not previously seen in my 32-plus-year career. Over the last decade, the transition in resource mix and demand growth has drastically increased operational complexity and has almost exponentially increased risk of having to interrupt electric service due to insufficient supply. We've already witnessed significant growth in both our summer and winter peak demands. Our current summer peak was 10% higher than the highest peak set 2 years earlier. And this winter, we set a winter peak that was 2.5% higher than the previous winter record demand. Electricity use in our region grew about 25% over the last 10 years. This growth in demand is expected to continue in unprecedented fashion as we are forecasting peak demand to be as much as 50% higher over the next 10 years, mostly driven by the AI data center boom. As consumption has grown, we have also witnessed a rapid shift from a more steady source of dispatchable generation to a more intermittent, renewable-heavy generation mix. In other words, many aging coal and gas plants have been retired and replaced with wind generation in our region, shrinking the firm capacity margin that we have long depended on for reliability. This growing imbalance between rising demand and a less dispatchable, more intermittent resource mix lies at the heart of what we have referred to as our generational challenge. Without a collective set of corrective actions, we will struggle to keep up with future needs, and our risk of not being able to continuously supply electric service to consumers will be at an all-time high. On our end, in SPP, we have been acting to increase regional requirements for excess capacity, and we are urging generators to stay online until sufficient replacement capacity is ready. We are working feverishly to accelerate our study processes for generator interconnections, and we've recently approved a transmission expansion plan requiring over 5 times the transmission investment of our previous largest project portfolio. We need significantly more generation and more transmission to meet the growing demand, and we need it to be interconnected much quicker than we've historically seen. We will also need more of the generation being interconnected to be dispatchable so that it is available when needed to offset the variability of intermittent, weather-dependent generation. Simply put, we need a lot more steel in the ground, and time is short. Meeting this challenge will require everyone's cooperation. We have to work together. For example, we need a fully functioning FERC so that they can continue their good work ensuring reliability, permitting infrastructure, and supporting competitive energy markets. Additionally, utilities can bring generation and transmission. RTOs can work together to lead and envision this future that we're all depending on. We all have to do our part to safeguard the grid so that the life-enhancing and life-sustaining product of power can continue to be provided as affordably as possible. I am confident that we can meet this challenge, but we cannot do it alone. We need your help. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your statement. And Mr. Meinzer, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Castor, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Elliot Mainzer. I serve as President and CEO of the California Independent System Operator Corporation, commonly referred to as the CAISO. The CAISO is a nonprofit public benefit corporation that does not own any generation or transmission assets. We play a number of key roles to ensure the grid is reliable, including transmission planning, overseeing interconnection of new resources, operation of electricity markets, and providing reliability coordinator services to entities across the Western Interconnection. We do not operate a centralized capacity market, but work with state and municipal entities to ensure adequate procurement and deployment of generation and storage resources. Like other regions of the country, California has faced extreme weather and other challenges, but the CAISO and our state partners have made major advances in reliability in recent years due to common sense approaches to expanding energy supply, efficiently interconnecting new resources, and proactively planning for transmission upgrades. New resources are coming online at a rapid pace. Since 2020, over 24 gigawatts of new generation capacity has been added to the CAISO grid, including approximately 7 gigawatts last year. This new capacity includes over 11 gigawatts of battery storage. The CAISO relies on these new resources, as well as a diverse generation mix that includes solar, wind, geothermal, biogas, hydro, natural gas, and nuclear generation to maintain reliability. During the next 5 years, we expect resource growth to continue to be comprised largely of battery storage, solar, and wind resources. At the CAISO, we work to ensure safe and reliable service to electricity customers through collaboration with California state agencies and other local regulatory authorities. The CAISO, the California Public Utilities Commission, and the California Energy Commission have entered into a memorandum of understanding to help synchronize load forecasting, power and transmission planning, interconnection queuing, and procurement of new resources. This enhanced coordination has been essential to onboarding the thousands of megawatts of new generating capacity and battery energy storage that have come online in recent years and will continue to guide our approach to ensuring reliability and resource adequacy in California. The reliability of our grid has also been advanced by thoughtful and timely oversight by FERC. Last year, FERC approved a comprehensive set of interconnection queue reforms resulting from an extensive CAISO stakeholder process that was anchored in our approach to coordinated planning. Based on our implementation so far, we have observed a significant reduction in projects clogging our interconnection study process. The CAISO's most recent transmission plan included 26 new projects at an estimated cost of $6.1 billion to support over 85 gigawatts of new resources by 2035. We are also actively engaged in several interregional transmission projects that will access clean energy resources identified in the CPUC's resource planning efforts that will also help deliver new generating resources and support reliability for utilities in other states. Electrification of transportation and buildings has been the primary driver of load growth to date within the CAISO's footprint. The CEC's latest demand forecast shows a 33% growth in peak demand over the next 10 years and a 45% growth in peak demand over the next 15. Currently, there is about 1 gigawatt of data center load connected to the CAISO system. The CEC projects an increase in data center loads over the next 15 years, with a sharp increase projected to start around the 2028 timeframe. The CAISO is working diligently to serve emerging large electric loads within our footprint, including major transmission enhancements to the transmission system in the Silicon Valley. Reliability in the West is further enhanced by the success of the CAISO's Western Energy Imbalance Market, which has been in operation since 2014. Optimizing supply and demand in 15-minute and 5-minute intervals, the Western Energy Imbalance Market today spans 22 market participants in 10 states and leverages the significant transmission connectivity and resource diversity across parts of the West, which is particularly valuable during extreme weather events. We are now working to extend a new day-ahead market platform to others in the West. Fully approved by FERC in 2024, the extended day-ahead market will expand the ability to optimize supply and demand in the day-ahead timeframe, which will further enhance market efficiency and reliability and reduce costs to the ratepayers of participating utilities. The CAISO recognizes that our work continues in order to maintain the pace of new resource development to meet growing electric demands and state policy goals. We remain focused on implementing our coordinated planning and interconnection processes and extending our market surface offerings to other entities across the West. We look forward to further engagement with the federal government to ensure reliability and cost savings for electricity consumers. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here this morning, and that concludes my testimony.
And thank you very much for your opening statement. And Mr. Vegas, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Castor, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and Vice Chairman Weber, and members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to be here representing the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT as we're referred to, where we manage the flow of electricity to over 27 million Texans. Texas continues to experience unprecedented economic and population growth, driving electricity demands to record levels each year. At the same time, the energy mix that powers Texas is evolving rapidly, with intermittent resources and battery storage playing an ever-increasing role in system operations. This transition presents opportunities, but also real challenges that require planning and investments to ensure system reliability. Today, I want to share how ERCOT is managing this shift while keeping reliability at the forefront, the lessons that we've learned from recent weather events, and why ensuring a balanced and resilient power supply remains essential for the future. In the summer of 2023, ERCOT set a new all-time peak demand record of 85,508 megawatts. Last month, we set a new winter peak demand record of 80,525 megawatts, a demand level that is normally seen and experienced in the summer. This isn't just about a growing population. Texas has become a magnet for industries that require increasing amounts of electricity, from semiconductor plants to data centers, broad industrial growth, and large-scale industrial electrification in the Permian Basin. Today, wind and solar make up 42% of our installed generation capacity. Both of those represent the most installed capacity in the United States, with thousands of megawatts being added each year. Battery storage, which was just emerging a few years ago, is playing a critical role in balancing supply and demand during tight grid conditions, and it's acting as a growing bridge asset during critical hours. From an operations perspective, solar generation helps to meet peak afternoon demand, and batteries provide rapid response to system fluctuations with their growing presence in the ancillary services market. Wind and solar power are variable by nature, meaning that their output is not always available when it's needed most. Batteries help significantly, but current storage technology is still limited in duration, and in our market, typically 1 to 2 hours, meaning that it cannot fully replace the need for traditional long-duration dispatchable generation. Natural gas, coal, and nuclear power still supply 65% of the delivered energy on the ERCOT grid in 2024. Those long-duration dispatchable resources remain the backbone of reliability, providing critical generation around the clock. We are seeing an uptick in the generation interconnection queue from gas generation, and efforts that have been spearheaded by the Texas legislature, such as the Texas Energy Fund, are providing incentives for dispatchable power plant development. We cannot lose sight of a fundamental reality. A reliable grid must have a balanced mix of generation resources, especially with the all-of-the-above approach we see in the ERCOT power region. Additionally, flexible demand is becoming a more critical component of reliable operations, and we are exploring ways to best leverage that potential in the face of the significant forecasted demand growth ahead of us. Immediately following Winter Storm Uri, the Texas legislature put in place a set of weatherization standards during the 2021 legislative session. And to date, ERCOT has conducted over 3,300 inspections of generation resources and transmission facilities. The weatherization program inspects facilities for various preparation measures intended to reasonably ensure sustained operation at weather zone-specific cold and hot conditions. And new programs such as the Firm Fuel Supply Service is available to ensure reliability during winter events in the event of a fuel curtailment for gas generation resources. This combination of efforts has shown to be beneficial over the last several winter seasons, where the performance held to the standard that Texans have come to expect from their grid. As we look to the future, ERCOT remains focused on ensuring that Texas has a grid capable of supporting its continued growth and economic success. That means encouraging investment in dispatchable generation, expanding and modernizing transmission infrastructure, leveraging demand-side solutions and new technologies, and enhancing grid security and resilience. The ERCOT grid is not alone at being at an inflection point. We are balancing record-breaking demand growth with a rapidly evolving generation mix, all while ensuring that we are focused on reliability for millions of Texans. It is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity to build a smarter, stronger, and more resilient grid that can continue to support Texas and the United States for generations to come. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your statement, and that concludes our opening statements from our witnesses. And at this time, we'll start questions from our members, and I'll start with myself for 5 minutes. And I'm going to ask the same question I've asked for the last 2 years. If I can just get answer more or less from everyone. Do we have to have more or less power produced in this country?
More.
More?
More?
More.
A lot more.
Significantly more.
Agreed, we need more.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Ashland, if I could start my questions with you. There are reports of supply chain delays for dispatchable generation resources, as well as ongoing delays for essential grid components, such as distribution transformers. How important is it to address these delays quickly?
Yeah, I think it's both critical to address the delays quickly, as well as try to be creative with the tools that we do have immediately, and we're trying to do both.
Well, let me follow up. Your testimony also details a striking graph displaying the delta between grid additions and deactivations. How much value is there to bring back mothballed power plants back online to meet either short-term or long-term reliability challenges?
I think it's an important part of the mix, and I think it's an important part of the mix because it requires less reliance on the supply chain. Because these plants exist, and so it's easier in some cases to actually restore them than to build a whole new one. But I think it's part of the solution. If we can get plants back from mothball, we would
Let me
appreciate
just
that.
follow up real quick on that. In your testimony, you said, how long does it take to build an AI plant?
Data center, maybe 18 months,
Okay, and then how long to build a power generation station?
5+ years,
Is that including the permitting?
including the permitting, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Curran, your testimony similarly discusses the need to allow reliability to inform the pace of retiring generation resources. How can we ensure that the pace of retiring generation resources does not outpace the addition of new resources?
So first and foremost, it's considering reliability in those retirement decisions. Today, as those decisions are made, they are generally driven by policy, in some cases economics, but there is not a check, at least at the MISO, to determine what the impact would be on the ability to have sufficient energy to serve the system.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ashland, if I could go back to you again. Your testimony went on to highlight some of the barriers to generation growth, including federal and state energy policies, supply chain constraints, and systematic permitting challenges. As I stated in my opener, the markets you administer do not operate in a vacuum. How are the policies outside the purview of your electricity markets and grid operations causing premature retirements and inhibiting growth in generation development?
Absolutely. So there's multiple, mostly decarbonization policies that are state and federal that have either forced generators to choose between really expensive upgrades that they couldn't afford or to go offline, and have pushed generation offline. I wrote down something you said, Chairman, markets cannot build what governments do not let them. I think we're seeing that. It's also true for power plants cannot operate if governments do not let them. And we have seen policies that do that. And an example of that is the EPA 111D decarbonization policy. And again, I don't make a value judgment. Climate change, in my opinion, is real and needs to be addressed. But I think reliability needs to be addressed also and simultaneously.
Let me follow up one last question to you. I've heard concerns from workers in an Ohio coal plant about what are detrimental effects of the previous administration's policy and recent state-level initiatives that could threaten their jobs. As you grapple with challenges resulting from rapid and widespread retirements of dispatchable generation without adequate replacement, is there merit in pausing the adoption of harmful policies at the federal and state levels?
From a reliability perspective, definitely there is merit in making sure that we don't retire generation that we will need to keep the lights on.
Thank you. In my last 38 seconds, Mr. Nickel, it'll be real quick if I may. While much of the focus of our electric grid is on increasing demands for electricity from data centers and domestic manufacturing, we also have to make sure the ratepayers are not unduly burdened. As you mentioned in your testimony, SPP enjoys some of the lowest wholesale electricity prices in the country because of your diverse generation mix of renewables and baseload. Will new investments into energy-intensive industries raise costs on ratepayers, or how can these new investments lower price for households? I only have about 3 or 4 seconds.
Yes, it could. It depends on how you do it, and I think we have to be really smart about how we move forward with that. Today, transmission needed to serve new load is spread across the region. It's cost shared. We may not be able to do that when large data centers are located in certain very specific locations. So we're evaluating that now.
Okay, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I recognize the gentlelady from Florida, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the president illegally fired the commissioners from the Federal Trade Administration. 2 of those members, commissioners on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, enjoy basically the identical statutory protections as the FTC commissioners, meaning that the president likely thinks he can fire the FERC and NRC commissioners too. And I think politicization of our energy regulators, allowing the president's whims to dictate which FERC and NRC commissioners can serve, is an awful idea. And it follows the National Nuclear Security Administration firings by Elon Musk. All of this really socks it to consumers, whether we're talking affordability, reliability. It's just dangerous and costly. Mr. Anthana, I heard you talk explicitly about a stable FERC and what that means to your operation. In fact, at one of our last hearings, a witness said they never wants to see proceedings before FERC and state utility commissions to become politicized. So I'd like to ask each of you, is more politicization of FERC a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I would say FERC is an incredibly professional body, and I think they make technical decisions, and we rely on that, on their technical expertise.
If you could answer maybe more or less. Should FERC be more politicized or less politicized?
Yeah, I think less between those 2 choices, for sure.
So my observation over the years is FERC has tried to stay in the middle to the extent possible, and I think that less politicization is helpful.
Thank you.
The other point I'd make is there needs to be alignment between federal and state policies.
More or less politicized?
For the same reasons, I will also say less. The stability of FERC is very important to move all of these things forward.
A less politicized, balanced approach would make all this transition a whole lot easier.
Less politicized, independent, absolutely is important for keeping the lights on.
A strong and independent FERC is essential to the success of our industry, so I'd say less politicization.
Speaking on behalf of my peers, since FERC really doesn't provide much oversight in Texas, I think a stable, independent FERC, it works best.
Thank you. One of our greatest challenges today is getting new sources of electricity onto the grid as quickly as possible in this era of increased electricity demand. Interconnection processes, while critical to maintaining the reliability of the grid, can also take far too long under the current framework. Last week, FERC Commissioner David Rossner wrote a letter to each of you detailing new opportunities to streamline the interconnection process. In a recent study by the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, an automated process was able to nearly replicate in 10 days the results of an interconnection study that took nearly 2 years to conduct. So Ms. Curran, can you briefly talk about what MISO found? What are the results? How can other grid operators start looking at automating and speeding up their interconnection studies?
Sure, absolutely. One of the challenges, actually, in operating the grid is that there's not a lot of software development that happens in this space. There is a vendor that has come to market that has put some automation around work that currently takes more of a guess and check approach by our engineers, and by automating some of that work with a codified rule set, we have been able to speed up on small samples the progress of the Q study by quite a bit. We're very optimistic about it. We are starting to apply it to larger samples. We do spend a lot of time with our peer RTOs sharing best practices, including information about what we're doing here.
Thank you. And Mr. Nickel, you've also had some success here. What else can FERC do to support this kind of innovation?
Encourage us, which clearly is happening with the letter from Commissioner Rosner. Very much appreciate what he's tried to do with that. Ms. Curran spoke about the fact that we share best practices already. And we've got a lot that we're really focusing on. We call it transformative technology. We're going to have to rely on that, and we're going to have to depend on artificial intelligence to make the solutions not only quicker, but much better. So thank you for your support, and we'll need that support from FERC and the encouragement that they've already begun to provide.
Thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the recognition, and thank you for all being here. You know, on the FERC and the other agencies, we just can't assume that the members of those agencies don't have agendas as well. And so we want them to work properly, but we also have oversight and checks and balances we need to have. When I first came into the role, I have this Congress right before. Actually, I've kind of been associated more with the healthcare side of this committee. Our committee's broad, as I pointed to Mr. Dingell earlier. We have a lot of broad jurisdiction, and I had an opportunity that we're actually going to have a great opportunity in a couple of weeks to have a hearing. Eric Schmidt from Google, Eric Schmidt, not Senator Eric Schmidt, wrote a book with Henry Kissinger called Genesis, presented at the Library of Congress, and I walked away with my mouth open, my heart beating, going, wow, this is the fight of our lives. Are we going to win the AI battle with China? And it really is. It's the fight of this committee, I think, or at least that direction I want to take the committee. And he didn't say this, these are my words, not his, but essentially he said it. He said that it's like being the dollar being the world currency. Somebody's going to have the world currency. Europe has chosen not to be that by their energy policies and their regulatory policies, which is right in the purview of this committee. China, we don't want to have the regulatory policies of China, but so if you talk to people in this area, they say we have the brain power, we have the capital, we have to have a stable regulatory environment, and we have to have the energy. We absolutely have to have the energy. And so if you look at the demand and growth of energy, what's the scary thing about it is, even if we said, all right, let's go full bore, we're still probably a decade behind where we need to be. And so when I talked in my opening statement, so this is for Mr. Estana and Mr. Nickel, in my opening statement I mentioned that we're going to take offload power, baseload power, we're going to take it offline almost as much as demand's going to grow in the next few years. And so what do we need to do, Mr. Estana, is how you say that correctly, and Mr. Nickel? So what do we need to do to reverse just retirement of generation we know that produces energy that we need?
I think there's a couple of things, Chairman. One is just sending the right price signals so that those generators can afford to stay. Those do lead to increases in prices for customers, but I think that's...
How do we send the right price signal?
Our markets are doing that. Our markets are holding up a mirror and reflecting back the supply-demand situation, and this price signal is being sent.
So that happens without government doing anything? There's no initiative we need to do to?
Not for Congress, I would say. I think FERC is critical in making sure that the markets are holding up a true mirror to the supply-demand situation, but not for Congress.
What would be a not true mirror if they're holding up? What would FERC do to hold up not a true mirror?
Well, I would say there's a lot of tweaking that can happen around the market rules, and we have been continuously improving them. But the fact is, I think that all of our markets are, in some shape or form, signaling we need more supply. And
So
that's,
if you're, but that's my question, I guess. So if the market's signaling you need more supply, and you're saying you're taking baseload power offline, not because of what Congress or the government's doing, it's because the market signal's not there. I don't understand that then.
yeah. So let me get to the second part of my answer, which is the markets cannot keep a power plant open if it's illegal to operate the power plant, no matter what price signal you send. And I think so there are laws, whether they're environmental laws passed by the states or the federal government.
I get your point. There's not a role in the market. There's a role in us to allow you to participate in the market. Okay, okay, that makes sense. All right, Mr. Nickel.
You bet, and thank you for the question. So I mentioned in my testimony earlier that RTOs have a role to play, and that role consists of leadership and vision and communication. We have to be more visible, and within SPP's footprint, we've done just that. We have been communicating the challenge that we're facing. We've also, Mr. Asthana talked about market signals. For us, what that looks like is setting a requirement that all load-serving entities have to meet for excess generation. And that requirement has been increased now 3 times over the last 2 years. So the
need stability
utilities
in the
know
marketplace.
that in order to be able to meet that requirement, they can't retire generation until significant replacement generation is available.
All right, thanks. And I only have 20 seconds. So, I mean, if the world existential threat is climate change, or if you believe it, I'm simplifying this to 2, it's a little more complicated, dominating AI, over being the world platform for AI, if you go the European route and say it's all climate change and we're going to let AI not participate in that market, that world, if you go that route, you're going to cede the AI to China. And China's building a coal plant every 2 weeks to support the energy for supply. You're not going to win, you're going to lose both. And that's why we have to focus on making sure we win this battle in a responsible way. So thank you, and I will yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Latta. You know, I want to say with the full committee chairman, I want to win the AI battle with China too, but you got a national security advisor who can't even send an email without jeopardizing national security. I mean, I don't know how the hell we're going to win an AI battle with China with these characters running the show, including the vice president and the secretary of defense and the others. I mean, it's like a clown show. But in any case, let me go back to the issue at hand. Mr. Asthana, as I alluded in my opening statement, I'm incredibly frustrated at the cost that PJM's failures are imposing on my constituents. The vast majority of the rate increase in New Jersey families is due to what happened with PJM's capacity market. So do you think it's fair that families around the region are seeing their bills spike? Simple question.
Let me correct the record. So New Jersey imported last year 43% of the energy that it consumed, okay? And that's New Jersey's right to have that plan. That's a benefit of being in PJM. But New Jersey's plan to make up that gap was to build offshore wind from 2018 onward. And New Jersey came to us and said, hey, can you help us with the offshore wind plan? And we put in probably more effort than we have with any other state to help New Jersey with the offshore wind plan, and we were proud to do it. And in fact, the New Jersey BPU gave us credit for saving New Jersey consumers $900 million through our work. Now, the problem is there's not one turbine spinning offshore New
I
Jersey.
have to get to my other questions, but you know, the Trump administration is doing whatever they can to stop any kind of offshore wind. They repealed all the permits, whatever. So, you know, to talk about offshore wind when you have an administration that's totally opposed to any kind of wind power, I don't even know what the point is. But look, you said in your testimony, more supply, more demand. You said that you're trying to create more supply now. But I just think it's a shame that New Jersey families are paying for what I consider PJM's mistake. The changes that PJM is making that you talked about, whether it's the processes to get energy hooked up to the grid, or for regional transmission planning, or capacity markets. All of these changes should have been made years ago, in my opinion. So why didn't PJM make its reforms to its interconnection queue and grid planning processes a decade ago? Why did it wait so long?
Well, just to clarify my answer earlier, since you asked, the reason we don't have turbines spinning offshore in New Jersey, it happened before the current
No, I know,
administration.
but look, Trump has killed the whole thing. So I don't, you know, he made that decision to pull it all. It's a political decision. It's a mistake. Back to this. Why didn't PJM make its reforms to its interconnection queues and grid planning process a decade ago? Why did it wait so long? I appreciate you testified about how you're trying to increase supply and address these things, but what was the reason for the delay?
It wasn't a delay, Ranking Member. We have been making continuous reforms for the last decade, and the process for interconnection needs to match the type of generators that are interconnecting. And so when the generators shifted to more intermittent renewable generators, we shifted our process with the support of FERC. And I will point to you, we have 50,000 megawatts of generation ready to go on a system that only consumes 150,000 at peak. We
Well,
can
I
replace
just
a
think
third
that
of
you
our
should have made
generation
these changes sooner, and the pace of change just hasn't been acceptable. But I want to shift to a national problem. The Inflation Reduction Act is in large part responsible for making nearly all the planned new electricity generation in this country feasible. Without it, the economics for many of these projects simply wouldn't work, driving rates up even higher for families. So let me just ask, I know there's only a minute, Mr. Van Wheelie. In your testimony, you mentioned that battery storage, wind resources, and grid-scale solar make up nearly the entire of ISO's New England's interconnection queue. Would it be good or bad for your grid's reliability if the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act meant that none of those projects were ever built, if you will?
I think it's going to, excuse me, it's going to make it harder for the supply resources to come forward.
All right. See, I mean, my point with the two, you both gentlemen, is I think that we need more supply, there's greater demand, we need to have all kinds of energy generation. I'm an advocate for wind, for solar, for nuclear, and I understand that what we also need more with fossil fuels. We need all of the above. But what I see happening here is that, you know, right now, because of the efforts by the Republicans, you know, to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, that's not going to happen, and there's going to be less supply at greater demand, and that's not a good thing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, the vice chair of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes for questions.
I thank the chairman for the recognition. I do want to make note that the member from New Jersey is calling the administration clowns was an editorial statement, not necessarily reflecting the view of the management. I want to get that in the record. But I do also want to ask, some of y'all, we'll start over here with you on the left. Do you ever feel or hear, or you feel about hearing about, you're somewhat unfairly criticized because sudden environmental changes happen which you had zero control over? Y'all ever feel like you're unfairly criticized in that regard?
Thank you for the question. I think I would say yes, but I also think it's fair to hold us to a high standard. We want to be held to a high standard.
Okay. You're next, your feeling. Yes or no, unfairly criticized?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am?
Sure.
Sir?
Absolutely. We strive to be the authoritative source, the independent source of information. So as long as we can stick to the facts and it's balanced assessment of what the impact of some of these policies are, that's generally a safe place to be, and it's helpful for
You sound like Sergeant Friday, just stick to the facts, ma'am. Sir?
You asked a difficult question. We deserve the criticism that we deserve. There are things that we can do better, and we will do better, and we deserve criticism for those.
I think at the end of the day, it all starts with accountability. We feel extreme accountability for reliability. If we get criticized, we'll take it, but we're always going to stay focused on producing results.
Mr. Vegas?
Vice Chairman, we're always working to get better. Continuous improvement is our motto.
Absolutely, and I hope people watching this interview or seeing it later, this hearing, recognize that. Y'all have a very critical place to play, a role to play. So I'm gonna come back to you, Mr. Vegas. In Texas, as you discussed in your testimony, Texas is seeing significant investments into data centers and manufacturing facilities because of our business-friendly state posture, and access to reliable and affordable power, quite frankly. Can you discuss how these particular opportunities are important to potential economic development projects?
It's critical. Economic growth is directly correlated with energy reliability and affordability, and we recognize that in Texas. The light regulatory environment that we have enables resources to be added to our grid more quickly than virtually any place else in the U.S. on both the supply and on the demand side. That's the engine for economic growth, and we continue to try to do everything to make support.
And we recognize, I'm glad y'all do, and to our colleagues across the aisle who have filed a proposition to make ERCOT join the rest of the grid, you know, we have a bumper sticker that says, "Don't mess with Texas." So we want to adhere to that. How do you conduct generation and resource planning to ensure all electricity consumers are paying the lowest possible rates and yet still have reliable power? You actually alluded to it in your testimony.
Yeah, affordability is something that's at the front of our strategic pillar and focus, so we think about reliability as well as affordability. And the way we do allocations in Texas, you know, everything flows down to load to consumers, large and small alike. And so it's really important, especially as we go into a growth environment, which we're all going into, to look at how that cost allocation is done, to make sure it's continued to be done fairly. We have a method that we've been using for the last 20 years. It's been working, but we're going into a new phase looking forward. It's a good time to look at that again and make sure it remains fair.
Well, thank you for that. And ERCOT leads the nation in renewable energy. And of course, you weren't there when the CREZ project went into effect. I spent 4 years in the Texas House before I got demoted to Congress. And so we passed that project. We made sure that energy was efficient. So wind and solar are comprising 42% of ERCOT's installed generation capacity, and yet Texas remains well-balanced with dispatchable sources providing 65% of deliverable energy. Given that solar is one of the fastest energy generation sources and its role that it plays in ERCOT, how important is us in Texas that solar technology is manufactured right here in the US of A?
It's critical that we see the supply chain move here to the United States. The security and the reliability of that supply chain is fueling the growth in a lot of the energy supply in the country. So the ability to have that supply chain protected here in America is critical.
So when you see restraints on supply chains, I know this is a question reaching every one of you, but I'm down to 27 seconds. On those supply chains, and these things are getting built in China as well as other countries, y'all have to cringe. You have to know in your heart of hearts that this stuff needs to be done in the United States of America. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back you 10 seconds.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey's 8th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. This summer, my constituents in New Jersey are bracing for a 17% increase in their utility bills. This jump is completely unacceptable and unsustainable, especially considering it was avoidable. PJM blames these increases on increasing demand and decreasing supply. I'd like to understand these claims a bit better, specifically the point on decreasing supply. One of the biggest drivers in the last capacity auction was a significant change in how dependable PJM assumed natural gas plants were. According to its independent market monitor, fully half of the price increase we saw in this auction was due to the change in how reliability was calculated. To put it in plain English, it turns out that natural gas plants were less reliable than we thought, and now our constituents are paying the price. Mr. Astana, can you talk about why PJM only updated those accreditation values for natural gas plants last year and not earlier, especially after Winter Storm Uri in Texas, where we saw thermal plant outages drive a huge amount of the unexpected outages?
Thank you for that. That's a great question. The answer to that is because after Winter Storm Uri in Texas, we get our natural gas from the Marcellus and Utica shales from our region. And we went to the industry in that region and said, hey, are we protected? Are we winterized? Are we protected against this sort of winter outage risk in the fuel supply system? And the answer was yes. And then we had Winter Storm Elliott, and we learned that we weren't. We lost almost a quarter of our generation. And so immediately after Winter Storm Elliott, we said we have to recognize this risk that we have now seen in how we accredit generation, and that's when we took action.
Okay, but we have to acknowledge, right, there's increasingly changing weather patterns, right? And so we have to sort of be a little bit more on the forecast front than we can do in sort of historical trends, because these changes are happening so quickly that to prevent these types of outages and shortages, we need to be a little bit more forward-thinking, think about redundancy to ensure we're not just hoping for the best case outcome, but preparing for the worst case outcome. I know you've also referenced state policies driving generator retirements. I just want to make the point that even though policy may have influence on such retirements, PJM and its partners have reasonably known for years about a large number of these retirements. Surely the capacity market has known about these retirements for a long time as well and priced them in. The discussion about transitioning to clean energy sources has been ongoing for decades. These retirement and decarbonization policies, which PJM blames for decreasing supply, should not have been a surprise. As Ranking Member Pallone mentioned, PJM by far has the worst backlog and slowest interconnection process of any other grid operator in the country. Thousands of projects are waiting to get connected. As you talk to us about the importance of building more power, your organization has lagged in its ability to actually connect power to the grid. Now our constituents are paying for this mismanagement, and I'm concerned that my constituents will continue to foot the bill with additional increases in 2026 and beyond. So will PJM commit to taking every step possible to bring new generation online, including the clean energy sources already in the queue, and bring down costs for New Jerseyans?
Yes, we're definitely committed to that. I do have to correct you. We do not have the worst queue in the country, particularly when you adjust for the size of our system. We serve 21% of US GDP. We believe we have less than 20%, much less than 20% of the national queue. So the work that we've done on our queue is showing dividends, but to your question, absolutely. I mean, New Jersey is critical to us. We want to do everything we can to support you, and we are committed to accelerating our queue continuously as much as we can.
I appreciate that. What immediate steps is PJM taking to address their interconnection backlog?
Well, the steps we've taken already that I pointed out have got us from almost 200,000 megawatts in the queue down to 67,000 left to go, with 50,000 more through the queue signed, ready to build, some of which are building. So for that 67,000, we have a FERC-approved process. We're executing it now. We'll get 17,000 of that by the end of this year, the other 50,000 by the end of next year. Then we will be on a regular 1 to 2 year queue cycle, which is a huge advancement from where we've come. And we're not stopping there. On top of that, we have just opened 2 additional windows for generators to come into the queue to add to what we already have. So we're growing the queue by opening the door, and we have a lot of people that want to come through that door, and we're committed to processing them as well.
And just real quickly, with respect to the energy capacity that is cleared but is yet to be connected to the grid, what challenges are those developers facing in getting their projects online?
A lot of supply chain issues, financing issues, and a lot of what we call NIMBY issues, not in my backyard. People don't want the infrastructure where they live.
And with respect to supply chain and financing, does the disruptive nature of this administration help with supply chain issues and with financing issues? Yes or no?
I'm not sure.
I think the answer is no. Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Ms. Curran, MISO issued warnings about brownouts and blackouts. What was the basis for those warnings?
If you are speaking to the NERC assessment that recently came out, we do a forward projection of the expected supply-demand balance.
The NERC assessments?
Well, the NERC assessment, I think, was where that forecast was made via NERC.
Wasn't the NERC assessment that the biggest challenge for meeting power demand and avoiding the blackouts and brownouts, the change of the resource mix?
No, the NERC assessment relayed the information that we showed, which says that our forecast of the amount of supply that's available to meet the demand that we expect faces shortfalls in the coming years.
But that, I think the MISO report also indicated that it was the shutting down of hydrocarbon-produced power and trying to replace it with renewables had created basically, in my terminology, a deficit in power output that has not yet been met. The NERC report, particularly in 2023, in assessing the challenges facing our power grid, said that the single biggest challenge or threat for power output was the change in resource mix. That, in other words, to put it in lay terms, we've shuttered too many hydrocarbon plants without bringing online enough renewables to meet the demand. When you take that in context to the fact that we're in an arms race with China for development of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, I think it really becomes problematic. And we keep talking about we get into my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and their concerns about the climate. We all are concerned about climate issues. But we're losing sight of what I think is a major national security issue. If China, whoever takes the lead in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, they're going to be the superpower. And we don't have the power generation capacity right now that we're going to need. We've got to build these data centers. They're going to require massive amounts of power. So I'm glad to hear, and I'm not sure I've heard this before from some of my colleagues, that they support all of the above, including nuclear, which is where I think we need to go. I'm going to ask Mr. Vegas, Mr. Asthana, Ms. Curran, Mr. Nickel, in your opinion, did the EPA take, each of you co-authored comments. I'll set this up to the EPA during the previous administration expressed strong concerns about the Clean Power Plan 2.0 because of the impact it would have on reliability within each of your footprints. And then those in charge of ensuring grid reliability in your respected areas, it should have been imperative that the EPA, who does not have the necessary expertise to analyze reliability, listen to those concerns. And what I would ask each of you, in your opinion, did the EPA take your concerns into consideration when they were finalizing Clean Power Plan 2.0? Mr. Vegas?
No, I don't think EPA adequately considered reliability in making their final determinations that they're in that
Mr.
rule.
Asthana?
Yeah, I would say the same thing as Mr. Vegas said.
Ms. Curran?
So a little more nuanced for me. I think that they did make some changes in response to our feedback, but as my colleagues noted, not nearly sufficient to address the issue at hand.
Mr. Nickel?
Congressman Palmer, I would agree with Ms. Curran. I think they did listen. I don't think they went far enough.
But would you all agree that the Clean Power Plan 2.0 impacts reliability in your area and ultimately will impact the ratepayer? Mr. Vegas?
Yes, it has the potential to shut down nearly 14,000 megawatts of coal plants in our region, which would affect reliability and cost.
Which goes back to the point I'm making earlier, that we've shut down too much hydrocarbon-generated power without bringing renewable power online or some other form of power generation to meet the demand. Same question to you, Mr. Asthana.
Yeah, it definitely raised reliability concerns for us.
Ms. Curran?
Yes, reliability concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Nickel?
Yes, absolutely increases our reliability concerns and increases our concerns about the affordability of electricity as long as those units are needed to be
Real
maintained
quickly,
online.
my last second here, would it have been more workable if FERC or some other agency had done the actual reliability assessment? Quickly, yes or no, Mr. Vegas?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Would the EPA rule have been more workable if the agency or FERC had conducted an actual reliability assessment of the rule's impacts and adjusted the rule to prevent these impacts?
Very quickly, please.
It would have been more, yes, it would have been more effective.
Mr. Asthana?
That is a tough hypothetical for me to answer.
Well, Ms. Curran?
Somebody needs to be doing reliability analysis
That's
on
a good
retirements.
answer. Thank you. Mr. Nickel?
I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman recognizes the lady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Castor for having this hearing. Mr. Sana, I'm glad that you mentioned the lessons learned from Winter Storm Elliott. As you know, Virginians will never forget Winter Storm Elliott in 2022, when more than 100,000 people in the Commonwealth and 1.5 million others in nearby states lost power. And while we expected some outages, 40 gigawatts of coal and natural gas plants failed, shutting down, as you said, a quarter of PJM's generation capacity. Gas plants alone, whether due to the issues at the power plant or issues with gas availability, were responsible for 70% of the outages. Now, that didn't need to happen. And with more clean energy generation and smarter long-term transition planning, we could have kept the lights on and have saved families money.
Renewables actually performed well during the storm, and wind power exceeded expectations thanks to the strong winds of the hurricane. As you mentioned, we can't afford to ignore these lessons, particularly as climate change continues to make winter storms and other extreme weather events more frequent and severe. And so while we want to ensure that we have enough generation to meet demand, we want to also make sure it's reliable and can meet peak demand. And so when clean energy combines with energy storage, these generation sources can play a key role in stabilizing the grid during peak demand. And clean and reliable renewable energy are also becoming cheaper to operate than fossil fuel-based generation and help protect consumers from fuel cost spikes. So the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project is one that we care very much about in Virginia, Democrats and Republicans. And if it had been up and running during Winter Storm Elliott, it is estimated it could have saved ratepayers an estimated $10 million in a single day. So, Mr. Asana, would you agree that adding renewable energy paired with storage to the grid can benefit grid reliability?
Yes, it definitely can, and we would love more of that. And we support coastal Virginia offshore wind significantly. If I may, I just wanted to add one clarification. The outages that consumers saw during Winter Storm Elliott in Virginia were not because we didn't have generation. It was because of icing and storm damage for more local power lines.
Okay, but it was the gas power plants, right?
It wasn't really because of the gas power plants. It was because of storm damage to the local. Even though we had a lot of gas power plants fail, in part thanks to exports from Rich in New York, we had enough power to serve all our customers.
But the point is you had gas power plants fail, and if the wind project had been up, the wind generation could have helped to keep people online during that.
It would have helped us import less from New York.
I think I'm going to take that as a yes. So you can understand why I'm perplexed that the Trump administration has this all-out war on wind and wants to prohibit any new wind projects when we keep hearing from our friends on this committee on the other side of the aisle that we need more generation. That includes more renewables in the mix. And so I'm glad we agreed that that would help. And I hope PJM keeps this in mind as it makes selections for its projects that it's expediting under the new Reliability Resource Initiative framework, because I'm concerned that if frameworks like that are used for more than a one-time fix, it could permanently imperil the benefits that consumers see from regional grids and competition. So can you confirm that PJM views RRI as a one-time intervention into its interconnection queue?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I was very glad to hear all of the witnesses talk about how important and independent FERC is, and I agree. But FERC's not the only federal agency that is important to whether new generation projects come online. Is that right, Mr. Asana? I'll start with you.
Yeah, there's various agencies that have a role.
And two of those are the Department of Energy and EPA, right? And you cannot have new generation come online without mandated by law reviews by EPA, right?
I think it depends on the state. So I don't know the answer to that question specifically.
Okay, well, subject to check, it's yes. But you would agree that the Department of Energy and EPA play an important role in new power generation coming online?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. And yet, President Trump and DOJ have led to the firing of over 1,000 employees from the Department of Energy
Gentlelady's time has expired.
and the EPA, and that's going to take us in the wrong direction, and I yield.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for Weber and Chair Latta for convening this hearing to review our nation's regional grid operators. I'd also like to thank all of you for your testimony today. Obviously, we pointed out the importance of grid reliability is paramount. We have rising electricity demand, and we must ensure that our grid's capacity meets that demand. Georgia benefits from a vertically integrated energy system, which I believe delivers reliable and affordable power tailored to our state's unique needs. Nuclear energy plays a vital role in this equation. My district is the location of Plant Vogtle. We're very proud of this achievement. It's the nation's largest clean nuclear energy facility, the first 2 new reactors built in over 30 years. And it exemplifies our commitment to sustainable, dependable power. Mr. Asthema and Mr. Dewey, while state and federal efforts have aimed to prevent the premature closure of nuclear power plants, some facilities have nonetheless shut down earlier than anticipated. If those plants had not been allowed to close, what effect would they have had on wholesale energy and capacity prices, and how would open plants have impacted consumers in your region? Mr. Aspen.
Yeah, we need more nuclear, and if we had it, it would, other things being equal, result in lower prices.
Okay, Mr. Dewey?
Same situation in New York. The closure of the Indian Point plant was deemed to be a safety issue by New York State as a policy matter. That eliminated 2,000 megawatts of carbon-free supply close to New York City. That would have certainly did impact capacity prices.
Okay. Mr. Curran, Mr. Vegas, Congress has been working to speed the licensing and deployment of nuclear reactor technologies. Are either of you working to develop incentives on how prices are formed to encourage investment in the very long-term assets nuclear power provides to the systems?
Yes, Congressman Allen, we are looking at opportunities inside of the Texas State Legislature to incentivize the development of nuclear power in the state of Texas.
Okay. Mr. Curran? Oh, Ms. Curran, I'm sorry.
That's okay, just making sure it was me.
Yeah.
So in MISO, our states are largely vertically integrated, and so it is the state utility regulatory commissions that are making those resource decisions. So while our market signal does provide information about the overall supply-demand balance, ultimately those choices are made in the states.
A question for all of our witnesses. Nearly 20% of our nation's electricity is generated by 94 nuclear reactors constructed 40 to 50 years ago. These reactors represent enduring assets, continue to deliver significant value long after the visionary decisions to build them were made. Today's market conditions, however, would likely discourage companies from pursuing such generational investments. As states grapple with rising power demands, they are seeking innovative tools to drive the deployment of next-generation nuclear facilities. So I offer this question to all of our witnesses. How can these potential state actions fit within your market, starting with you, Mr. Aston?
Yeah, I'd like to clarify about half of our states are actually vertically integrated, where the states can make that decision on what they want to build. And in the other half, it's based on the market. But I do think it's difficult for private capital to build nuclear power plants today. It's just really difficult. It's very risky and very expensive. And so I think if we as a nation want more nuclear power, we should think about ways to support it federally.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Manuel?
Good question. It really comes down to the states. I mentioned in my testimony that the states have the ability to select resources and make longer-term commitments to certain resource classes. There is renewed entry in small modular reactors in New England, so there's conversations happening in state legislatures and amongst the governors. And so, ultimately, I'd make the same point Ms. Curran made, which is the ISO does not select these resources. It's really up to state policymakers to decide how they want to go about incentivizing or contracting for certain resource types.
Yeah. Ms. Curran?
Yes, I have nothing to add to that.
Okay. Mr. Dewey?
New York State has initiated a blueprint process for exploring the development of new nuclear, specifically small modular reactors. We would welcome that from a grid operations standpoint, and with our all-in approach towards generation, we think would be a good mix for our fleet.
Okay. I am out of time, so if you would submit for the record the answer to that question, I would appreciate it. And I had an additional question that I'll submit to you, and if you would answer that for the record. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Allen, I have such good news for you because in the last Congress, when we had Chair Duncan of this subcommittee and I was the ranking Democrat on this subcommittee, we passed the Advance Act, which we actually all voted for on both sides of the aisle in this committee. It went to the floor and we passed it and President Biden signed it. And what this bill was designed to do is exactly what you're concerned about, which is to streamline and modernize the regulations around nuclear power. And as Mr. Pallone said, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle really every time seem stunned that Democrats support an all-of-the-above approach. But as we're seeing large loads like data centers and increasing demand for electricity all across America, we recognize that we're going to have an all-of-the-above approach, including renewables and everything else. So let's stop acting like we haven't done anything, because the last Congress we did some very important things. One of the important things we did was the Inflation Reduction Act. I want to talk to some of you about that. Now, all of the panelists early in this hearing, all of you said that that demand for electricity is going to increase in this country. Is there anybody who disagrees with that? No. They're all shaking their heads no. And so the second question is, regardless of the source of the power, to accommodate the increase, we're just going to need to have a variety of sources for electricity transmission, and we're going to have to increase reliability. Does anybody disagree with that statement? No. They're all shaking their heads no. Well, so one other question is, all of your grids that you're talking about here today, they don't just rely on fossil fuels. They also rely increasingly on renewable energy. Does anybody disagree with that statement? No. They're all shaking their heads no. Here's why I ask that. Because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are implying that the way we're going to solve the issue of increased demand and increased reliability is by just simply jettisoning renewable energy and going, I guess, to nuclear and fossil fuels. Is there anybody who thinks that your agencies and the people who you are running the grids could jettison all renewable energy? No, they're all shaking their heads no. There was a recent study that was published by a think tank called RMI, and what it said is that the Inflation Reduction Act made clean energy cheaper than more than 90% of proposed gas plants. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to put that article into the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. Now, collectively, the IIJA and the IRA allocated almost $17 billion in loans and grants for grid development. But despite that, the Republicans voted 54 times to repeal the Clean Energy Plan since the Democrats passed the IRA. So I don't have time to ask all of these wonderful witnesses today. So the one closest to me is Mr. Aslana. I'm sorry for you. But what I want to ask you is, if we repealed all of that money going for grid development from the IRA, would that help or hurt our ability to stabilize the grid and to increase production?
I think in the near term, the interconnection queue is full of a lot of renewable projects, many of whom are, I'm sure, counting on the IRA. And so I'm sure it would make those less likely to come, and we do need them to come.
Okay. Anybody disagree with that on this panel? No. They're all shaking their heads no. Now, I just want to ask one more thing to follow up on what Ms. McClellan was asking. Mr. Van Wheely, in your written testimony, you talked about offshore wind as a potential vital resource for grid reliability in New England. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, were you aware that as part of the very early executive orders, President Trump signed an executive order putting a halt to wind production offshore nationwide?
Yes.
What would that do to the ability to have reliable grid production in New England?
It has an impact, as I said in my testimony, towards the end of the decade, because we were counting on these resources coming into the system by the end of the decade.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to put a copy of that executive order into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. I
lady's
yield back.
Time has expired. She yields back. The gentleman now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to state that I believe in the best of the above, not all of the above. And I think that differs from state to state. In West Texas, we have no access to hydropower, unfortunately, like they do in the Pacific Northwest. But if you have access to affordable, reliable sources, then we should use those. Mr. Vegas, I think we need to do a math problem here. So sorry for math in public, but let's talk about what the current demand is in Texas for what ERCOT is serving. What are we seeing annually?
Current demand, peak in the summer is around 80 to 85,000, and in the winter about 80,000.
Okay. And in the next 3 or 4 years with added industrialization, added population, data centers, what do we think that is going to grow to in Texas?
We're now forecasting that by 2030, we expect around 150,000 megawatts, so that's an additional 65,000 megawatts over where we are today.
Almost double
Almost double.
in 3 to 4 years. This is incredible. So what I want to get to is when you look at the balance, you're balancing price, you're balancing reliability, you're balancing all these different things. You know, what are the best sources that you are looking for today at 85 and in 3 years at 150 plus?
So we're getting to a point on the Texas grid where you can start to see that the peak demand is exceeding the dispatchable generation that we have available on the grid. So it's important as we look forward to meet the demands of this growth to grow the supply in a balanced way. The balanced resource mix brings, I think, the best portfolio for consumers. It brings cost combinations that vary and give the optimal price, and it also brings characteristics around reliability and resilience that are important. So as we look forward, we need to make sure we keep up with firm dispatchable generation in addition to the strong growth that we continue to see on renewables.
Firm dispatchable generation. So I just looked it up on your website, ERCOT.com, and right now in my hometown it's 78 degrees. And we've got a little bit of wind, which is serving 18% of the grid, 45% solar. But talk to us about when it's hot or when it's cold, and how reliable on those days where you have 100 degree plus, which we have about 90 plus days in the summer in Texas of 100 degrees or more, or when it's cold, how reliable are those sources?
Yeah, as I said earlier, over the course of a year, the actual delivered energy on the Texas grid, 65% of it comes from our thermal fleet, which is our coal, our natural gas, and our nuclear. They are the backbone of reliability. They complement what we're getting from the renewable mix as well. And right now, we need all of the supply that's there. It's clear that we need it all. We're seeing 63% right now coming from renewables. But when the wind isn't blowing and when it's nighttime and in the summer when it's hot, you still need a lot of energy to support that air conditioning load. And that requires long duration dispatchable resources to do that.
I've only taken a few weather classes in my life, but I would invite my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to come out to West Texas in the summer. It's miserable. When the wind blows in the springtime, it at least cools you off, but not in the heat of the summer. NERC said that we're in a reliability crisis. That's their 2024 overview, their analysis. Do you agree with that going forward?
I think the concern with the pace of load growth and the pace of retirements coupled with the lack of dispatchable long-duration resources coming online leads to that being a logical conclusion.
Mr. Astana, I feel like there were responses that you had in a previous line of questioning, and I'd like to give you a minute or so if you want to clear up anything or talk about the role of natural gas, which obviously I think as you look at ERCOT is very important, and it seems like it is to you as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. The only clarification I would make is about half of our system, our capacity is natural gas. And the rate of investment in natural gas infrastructure has significantly lagged the rate of growth of natural gas utilization. And so natural gas is becoming less flexible for us. And that's why one of the things I mentioned in my top 6 hit list is making sure that we invest in natural gas infrastructure, because we need it to be flexible.
And Mr. Vegas, I'll end with you in the last few seconds. When government dictates policy that doesn't allow you to have the right capacity, the right mixture, what does that do to affordability, reliability, and at the end, what does it do to our national security?
It's absolutely detrimental to affordability and to reliability, and it risks our energy security.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chairman, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Masui, for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member, Castor, for calling this hearing today. And I want to have a special welcome to the California ISO president, Elliot Mainzer. You haven't been asking me questions, so I will ask you a lot of them today. At any rate, grid operators face many challenges today: rising electricity demand, aging infrastructure, rising energy costs, and the need to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. My Republican colleagues often say, we need more energy, not less. Well, I agree. We need more energy, but it must be cleaner, cheaper, and built faster than we have in decades. Yet, President Trump is deliberately obstructing energy projects, freezing funding, halting critical projects, and firing federal employees responsible for maintaining and permitting our energy infrastructure. Reuters reported last week that President Trump and Elon Musk's mass layoff had predictably slowed federal energy permitting. Mr. Mainzer, hypothetically, if many energy projects in California were delayed because there's no federal employees to review permits, how would that impact grid reliability?
Given the increasing demand for electricity, anything that crimps the supply will have detrimental impacts on reliability.
Okay. It's also been reported that President Trump and Elon Musk have fired Bureau Reclamation employees that operate and maintain critical hydropower infrastructure. Mr. Mainzer, hypothetically, if we see a significant reduction in hydropower output because these systems are not adequately maintained, how would that impact grid reliability?
Well, hydropower plays a critical role, not only within California, but in the broader West, also in the Pacific Northwest. So maintaining the health of those assets is critically important.
Okay. The federal government is not Twitter. We cannot let Elon Musk play around and gamble with our critical infrastructure. If a dam fails or the electric grid goes down, the consequences could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, congressional Republicans are planning to repeal federal energy tax credits that are currently financing hundreds of energy projects across the country. Independent analyses from Aurora Energy Research and Energy Innovation show that repealing the IRA tax credits would cost American families billions in higher energy costs and reduce new energy deployment by hundreds of gigawatts. Mr. Mainzer, hypothetically, if there's a significant drop in the number of financially viable energy projects over the next 10 years, how would that affect reliability?
Again, I think as I and my other colleagues have mentioned here today, anything that's going to impact the supply of commercially viable projects to meet the rapidly growing demand in our grids is going to be problematic and could potentially compromise reliability and affordability.
Okay, so that would impact our ability to meet new energy demand and slow down the time to power for new data centers?
Yes.
Okay. I know a lot of my Republican colleagues think clean energy is unreliable, and many of my colleagues like to point to California as proof that clean energy is unreliable, but that view is really badly outdated. Mr. Mainzer, very briefly, can you talk about how grid reliability has improved in California over the last few years?
A reliable grid relies on a portfolio of resources of different attributes and complementary characteristics. What we've found in California, as we have seen the state choose to elect a much larger proportion of solar energy in particular, that by pairing those resources with dispatchable batteries, that has helped to increased reliability in recent years. So it is a portfolio effect. You need to plan carefully, but by carefully considering all the different resource attributes and making sure that they're all available to the system, we have been able to significantly improve reliability in recent years.
Okay, thank you. CAISO has also worked to improve reliability in meeting rising demands by supporting the build-out of long-distance transmission infrastructure and by participating in larger energy market spanning 10 western states. Mr. Mainzer, can you briefly explain how improving interregional energy transfer across the western U.S. helps to improve reliability and meet rising demand?
Yes, thank you. We've been very fortunate over the last decade to be able to take advantage of the significant transmission connectivity that exists between California and the Northwest and the Desert Southwest. And by leveraging that transmission connectivity and resource diversity, we've been able to operate a Western energy imbalance market that has significantly improved reliability and affordability. We're also engaged in working with other states and other utilities to further enhance the Western grid, which will make a big difference in reliability going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. My time is up. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee for at least 5 minutes.
At least 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Nickel, I'm going to start with you, so listen closely. I'm going to come up with a scenario for you, and in this scenario, let's assume that Southwest's power pool increases its wind capacity by 30-fold over 2 decades. And let's say that on a very windy day, as much as 90% of your region's demand's met by wind power. The date's February 27th, and let's just say that changing wind speeds caused generation to plummet by 12,000 megawatts in just 2 hours. So what are you going to do when the wind dies down in this scenario?
It's an interesting scenario. I don't know where you picked up on that, but it is
Right out of
real.
my
It's a
head.
real scenario. It's something we've experienced. And what we were forced to do is to rely on the backup generation that we had available, and that primarily consists of gas generation because it can be started quickly, it can be ramped up quickly, and it can meet the need very reliably. So that's what we did.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Ms. Curran, it's your turn. In this scenario, let's say that you experience a wind drought that lasts 40 consecutive hours. How do you make up for that?
Thank you. Another familiar scenario that did happen to us. The way you make up for it is with resources that do have fuels that are available on demand. So in MISO, that would be coal and gas generation that is able to run for that duration.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Now, Mr. Astana, it's your turn. The date's December 24th, 2022, during one of the coldest days that the Tennessee Valley region's ever experienced in decades, and TVA calls and says it doesn't have enough power to meet this demand. So what do you do, sir?
It's a great question. Thank you. And they did call. They called me directly.
Yes, they did.
And we did our best to support them with a significant amount of exports.
Yeah, so what kind of exports?
They were on the margin, natural gas and oil.
And why did you still have enough power on your wires to help TVA while still meeting your own needs?
Well, we had healthy reserves then, and so we were able to support our neighbors. And it wasn't just TVA. We were exporting power to multiple neighbors at the same time.
Yeah, I remember that. And I had brownouts and blackouts. And, you know, I've looked at all your testimony, and the key challenges every one of you have talked about are the rising demand in energy due to electrification, manufacturing growth, data centers, producing AI. Then you talk about generation transition. Accelerated retirements of transitional power plants are outpacing new renewable generation capacity. We talked about extreme weather impacts and then transmission limitations. And current infrastructure is inadequate to meet growing needs, and new projects face regulatory and logistic hurdles. And, the testimony paints a really clear story. And for one, wind energy may have value to power companies, but it cannot be depended upon when people need it most. And this wind energy has been widely deployed around the country because of generous government subsidies, which increase reliability. Problems as it crowded out more reliable sources.
So I personally think that it's astonishing that wind continues to receive government subsidies. And especially while the utility companies still have to keep their other power plants online, even when they aren't making any money, just to make up for the overbuilt wind. As long as the policies that we make here continue to emphasize unreliable weather-dependent energy rather than supporting the no-fail grid, blackouts are going to keep happening, aren't they? And so I think it's time we have to revisit our priorities and focus our efforts toward keeping the lights on, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you all.
Gentlelady yields back. The chairman recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses as well. As all of you know, the Pacific Northwest does not have an RTO or ISO represented here. Our energy markets and balancing authorities are very different. RTO or not, though. Most of us are seeing exploding load growth in the Northwest because of affordable energy. In the Pacific Northwest, it's chip fabrication and data center expansion that are the demand drivers. Now, depending on who you ask, we are likely facing a nearly 16% increase in load growth by the end of the decade, five-fold increase in what was previously forecasted, and we've heard today about how long it takes to interconnect and to build new energy. Now, I say likely because we don't have great quality of data inputs for these models. And accurately forecasting load growth from data centers is difficult because they are notoriously secretive. We also know these companies shop around to multiple utilities, potentially duplicating the same load in several service territories. For the existing data centers, operators often don't want to share data about their energy uses for proprietary or national security concerns. Mr. Asthana, you've been on a lot today. I've got another one for you. Given the surge of demand that you're seeing at PJM, I'm more concerned about making sure we're building strategically than about overbuilding. But considering all of these challenges, how do we ensure that power planners have the right tools to accurately predict load growth?
A wonderful question. Thank you for that. We're at a time where both demand is growing rapidly and the rate of growth is incredibly uncertain. I mean, it is really hard. All the issues you talked about, whether you're double counting something or not. And so we significantly discount down from the gross numbers that are being submitted to our utilities. In fact, they will discount their numbers based on their own criteria, some of which are, have people put up money behind this project, or is this just a conversation or signed contract? But I do think this is an opportunity for continued refinement.
Does discounting numbers mean like lowballing the estimate?
No, not lowballing, but applying criteria. So if you start with a gross pool that is huge and it's just not plausible, how do you cut down to what you think is reasonable? There are filters you apply. Like, have these people, put up money? Do they have a signed contract? Have they acquired the land? That sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. We all agree we're going to need a lot of energy and really fast, and we want more domestic manufacturing. We talk about that all the time. We want to win. We need to win the AI race with China, and that's going to require a ton of energy. And no power planner is saying natural gas won't be part of that puzzle. It absolutely will. But really, we should all have the goal of deploying more non-GHG emitting energy. So let's do these things like nuclear and geothermal and the like. My next question is for Mr. Mainzer and Mr. Nickel. At the last hearing with your organizations, I asked both CAISO and SPP about the governing structures of day-ahead markets developing in the West. And there have been significant developments since then with Bonneville's draft decision to join SPP Markets Plus. But I'd love to hear from each of you how utility membership in your market would uniquely benefit the Pacific Northwest in the face of surging growth from data centers and manufacturing. And I'm going to start with Mr. Nickel.
So thank you for that question, Congresswoman. SPP's current 14-state footprint is flush with a lot of wind generation. In fact, you heard it earlier today, that we've seen as much as 90% of our demand served by wind generation. We know it's not always available. It's plenty available when the wind is blowing. And the same thing can be said of the solar generation that's in the desert southwest part of the United States. When the sun's shining, it's a tremendous resource, and we love having it available to us. The same thing is true of hydro generation in the Pacific Northwest. We find that for those participants that want to participate in our market, a tremendous opportunity to leverage a diverse portfolio of renewable generation that's very important to you and to your constituents in the Northwest.
Mr. Mainzer.
I would just add that from a physics and economics perspective, we have that connectivity today to the Bonneville system. We've been leveraging it for years and providing billions of dollars of economic and reliability benefits. And I give Bonneville a lot of credit for pushing the envelope on governance, and we are also reforming our governance structure to address their concerns. Thank you.
And thank you for heading up Bonneville for so many years.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I yield
very much,
back.
Representative.
The gentlelady's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa's 1st District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Latta and Ranking Member Castor, for holding this important hearing on grid reliability. Iowa's 1st District has emerged as a national leader in renewable energy, including wind energy, with 59% of our electricity now generated from this renewable resource. It has the power to be transformative for our region, driving down energy costs for families and businesses while also creating jobs in manufacturing. Our success with wind demonstrates how quickly clean energy can be deployed at scale. In just 5 years, we've reduced coal dependence from 45% to 23% while maintaining some of the lowest electricity rates in the country. However, as I've already heard, we have to recognize that a balanced, diversified approach is critical for grid reliability. Our natural gas facilities in Coralville and Burlington provide flexible generation needed. Our historic Keokuk hydroelectric plant contributes baseload renewable power that's been operating reliably since 1913, and we have an additional hydroelectric plant at Lake Red Rock. The closure of Iowa's only nuclear plant, Duane Arnold, represented a loss of 601 megawatts of carbon-free baseload power, and I'm encouraged by NextEra's discussion about potentially restarting operations at this facility. And as we listen to testimony from the regional grid operators today, I'm particularly interested in MISO. I've been there, had a wonderful tour, and I encourage all members to visit their grids, and how they're integrating increasing amounts of renewable energy while ensuring we maintain sufficient dispatchable resources to address the reliability challenges highlighted in your memorandum. The recent loss of load expectation 2025-2026 study found that wind's effective load carrying capability in winter dropped drastically from 53% to 29% year over year. And we, of course, saw that in the polar vortex in Texas. As a state that has invested heavily in wind, this is concerning. What's driving this change, and what are the implications for future wind development? And Ms. Curran, what's your approach to maintaining reliability?
Thank you. One of the implications of this portfolio shift that is underway is that we have increasing dependencies and correlations between our type of generation. And we are increasingly looking at what is available when it is most challenging from an operational perspective, including the time when you most need resources may be changing, and that certainly affects that accreditation. We are very focused on making sure that we are coming up with the right values so that those that are making the decisions to invest in resources can understand what value they provide, both from that capacity perspective as well as energy. The other piece of the equation that we have not talked a lot about today is transmission. So transmission is necessary to get the resources from where they are generating to where they are needed. In MISO, we benefit from a large geographic diversity, and that means we have the opportunity to transport power across multiple states that may have different weather patterns at different times to help meet that reliability need.
Thank you. Mr. Asthana, President Trump has made it clear that he sees co-location as a key arrangement to power data centers. However, co-location arrangements in PJM have become a major policy topic at FERC and in states that have inhibited timely access to energy for data centers. When structured correctly, co-location can provide timely access to energy while ensuring other ratepayers are held harmless. How can PJM ensure that co-location arrangements are allowed to move forward in a timely manner?
We actually made a filing with FERC yesterday highlighting 3 different ways in our current rules that you can actually accomplish co-location, and then we suggested 5 other mechanisms to do that, and now we're awaiting feedback from FERC on how best to proceed.
Thank you. In the 2024 Long-Term Reliability Assessment Report, NERC recommends that to maintain demand and supply balance, dispatchable generators, including carbon-based fuel generators, must be available and capable of following changing electricity demand. And for the past 2 years when I was on this committee, we've hammered on this. To ensure reliability, what measures are you taking to discourage premature retirement of carbon-based fuel generators, such as the Power Plant 2.0 rule? How are we able to maintain dispatchable or energy when we're retiring carbon-based fuel generators prematurely?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I partially answered this earlier, but part of it is through sending the right market price signal to induce them to stay. Part of it is through working with our states and federal regulators to try to ensure that we don't have rules that force these generators offline prematurely.
And I would say the same, market rules that ensure that these resources get appropriate compensation, and then in our ability as having a regional view, providing information about what the supply-demand balance really is. And we have seen states taking action based on that information that we've provided.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have a question to submit for the record, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas 7th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Latta, and thank you to our witnesses for your time and your testimony today. I am glad to have Mr. Vegas here from ERCOT as a fellow Texan for this important hearing, and no surprise, I will have a few questions for you. But I think there's been a really important theme that's come out of today's hearing, and as we have discussed, right, the United States is on the brink of a new boom in energy demand, and that demand arises from things we've touched on, from data centers and AI development, from widespread electrification to, as you noted, Ms. Curran, efforts to reshore American manufacturing that we've undertaken over the last 4 years, including through some very important legislation passed by Congress. And I think you all have made clear that this is an area where smart policy is needed, and that this committee and this Congress have an important role to play in setting that policy. It's kind of contrary to the efforts underway to take a chainsaw to the federal government. This is precisely where we need smart policy and nationwide coordination and sharing of knowledge. This is really core to what government is about. Right, pooling our resources and our expertise to keep us safe, right? To make sure that the lights come on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to make sure that we have power when we need it. It's important to our safety. It's important to our national security. It's important to our ability to grow our economy. It is important to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so before we look forward to some of the issues that have been raised, I want to look back on one thing, Chairman Latta, just to touch on this. I understood you to say something in your opening statement about wind and solar not being as reliable during weather events, and I just want to point out that during Winter Storm Uri, we actually found that solar generation was the only one of the resources to outperform ERCOT's worst-case scenario expected output. So I do think that there are lessons to be learned from our experience in Texas, and I'd be glad to share them when we have more time on this committee. But I do want to talk about this energy demand and growth. I know it varies by region, and in Texas, we're already home to 330 data centers, approximately 60,000 Texans employed there, more on the way, and I understand that ERCOT is forecasting nearly 76% load growth by 2030. And while we've seen commitments to build a variety of generation, we know that demand is going to exceed current generation capacity without continued investment. So, Mr. Vegas, I want to ask you, last month, ERCOT released its capacity demand and reserves report for 2025 through 2029, and it indicates that absent major changes, ERCOT's reserve margins will drop to negative values within 2 years. Can you just explain what that means for consumers in real terms? Does that mean rolling blackouts, higher energy bills? How are you protecting ERCOT customers from the market shocks that
the large data centers might bring and this increased demand?
So I think it's helpful to set a little context on that report. That report is a very rigidly structured report that requires us to report effectively the amount of generation that's in our queue that we expect to come online, the amount of load that is expected to be built based on the rules on how we count load. And so what it does not reflect is as important as what it does. What it does not reflect is the response of the market to the conditions as they evolve over time. So what we would expect to see as we get to a condition where demand is growing, supply needs to keep up, we would expect to see prices start to be more elevated on a consistent level in the wholesale market. That would send signals to develop resources. It would also send signals to slow down load growth. Load is very responsive to prices. And so it doesn't reflect those dynamics of the market working. And so I don't want consumers to think it's forecasting blackouts or brownouts in the future. What it's forecasting is that there needs to be a concerted effort to match the demand growth with supply. The market economics should deliver that, but without that market dynamic, we are looking at shortfalls in the future.
Okay, well, I think that that's helpful so that folks aren't too worried, but I do know that there are proposals in the legislature, for example, that would sort of hamstring ERCOT's ability, I think, to quickly add some renewable assets to the grid, and that you're forced to pair them with natural gas and or coal plants. So I think, from your perspective as the grid operator, do those kinds of policies that limit the development of certain energy resources help or hurt your ability to meet demand?
Right now, we need policies that support the growth of all the resources that can come onto the grid. And and I emphasize again, the balance of those resources is so critical to meet the future demand that's coming. Because it's such a large growth, we need to have a balanced portfolio going forward.
Thank you so much. I have gone over my time, but again, thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina's 7th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate that. This issue is especially critical for South Carolina in the 7th District, where economic growth and energy security really go hand in hand. As we continue to witness rising energy demands with manufacturing, with data centers, and electrification efforts, we have to be prepared to ensure our grid remains reliable and resilient. Your testimony has talked about that a lot. South Carolina has faced fewer reliability risks thanks to our strategic decisions, but they still do exist. Ms. Curran, as we've discussed today, it's unclear whether the generation expected to come online will be enough to meet future demand and replace retiring resources. Developers seeking to enter the market are hampered by permitting delays, supply chain issues, and overly burdensome environmental regulations. Are there changes to market rules or new technologies that can help us maximize the capacity and efficiency of our current grid to improve reliability over the next few years?
Sure. So having some of those new technologies or other changes are one of the pieces of the portfolio we'll have to do. Maximizing our existing system is important. One of the most important tools from the MISO perspective is actually the operations of the MISO market. One of the things we do is seek to actually get the most out of the existing assets we have within the constraints of reliability, which means we're not leaving excess capacity on the system, be that generation or transmission capacity. And I think that's a model for all electricity operation.
Do you find that model duplicated across other sectors? I mean, like with your neighbors here, do they do the same thing roughly?
So we have and do that maximization, for example, with our neighbors PJM and SPP. It is not necessarily the same across the country, including in those areas that don't have a regional transmission organization.
Thank you for that. And is MISO currently utilizing AI models to improve operational efficiencies and system management? And if so, can you expand on how these tools are enhancing your ability to forecast demand, manage resources, and mitigate reliability risks?
Absolutely. As we've talked about a lot today, there are a lot of new variables in the system. You have this intermittent generation, you have changing load patterns, be it from data center or just consumer changes, weather impacts and the like. There's a lot more uncertainty in the system. We use in our operation something we call an uncertainty management model, where we leverage artificial intelligence to better forecast what the next day might look like with all of that variability. So taking in all of those very hard to forecast variables and trying to come up with an impact. We have seen tremendous results, both in reliability, but probably more importantly, getting that reliability more affordably. So we've been able to plan better and thus result in lower costs for customers from using that technology.
Thank you for that. Mr. Aston, your testimony highlights the importance of reliability must-run RMR agreements as a critical tool for ensuring short-term reliability as plants retire and new resources come online. Can you describe how PJM utilizes these agreements to maintain grid reliability during those transitions?
Yeah, we like to use reliability must-run contracts as little as possible. They're really only used for local transmission constraints. So when a generator wants to retire and submits that request to us, and we feel like we need that generator to keep the grid reliable for local transmission constraints until we can build the transmission system, then we enter or seek to enter into a reliability must-run agreement with that generator. But we want to use it as little as possible and let the markets work as much as possible.
You want to build new plants. Well, new generation, right?
We definitely want new generation, yeah.
Are there ways that these agreements can be improved to offer additional flexibility, particularly in light of the supply chain challenges and infrastructure delays that we have?
Are you asking about reliability must-run contracts or just in
Correct.
general?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're working with our members right now on ways that we might improve our reliability must-run process.
And how would that look? Just curious.
We haven't decided, but some of the things that we're thinking about are whether we have a standard contract with every generator that wants to or that ends up needing to sign up, or a sort of bespoke contract. So that's an example. But there's a host of issues that are on the table and being considered.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York's 20th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I associate myself with the consensus that we've heard from our witnesses, and thank you all for being here, on the importance of building new transmission for improving reliability and bringing new resources online. But I'd also like to hear more about how New York is pursuing other strategies for addressing reliability challenges. So, Mr. Dewey, first let me thank you for your leadership at my home ISO. I appreciate the work you and the team at the ISO do each and every day and respond to New York's needs. We know New York is dealing with increasing electric demand, especially chip manufacturing upstate and an aging generation fleet. For the past several hearings, I've been trying to highlight the role that demand management, including energy efficiency and demand response, can play in reducing peak demand and improving system reliability. So can you discuss what New York is doing to simultaneously support grid reliability and energy-intensive economic development? And do you see a role for demand-side policies to contribute to New York ISO's efforts?
Thank you, Congressman. I would say that the ability for demand to be flexible and to recognize the opportunities for flexibility and demand, whether it be demand response, whether it be load shifting to different hours of the day, is going to be absolutely crucial to maintain reliability in this modern grid, where the intermittency of variable resources like wind and solar can vary a lot over time. We're going to need to have that flexibility in the load profile. We're going to need to be able to recognize which loads can be flexible. Some of the data center loads and some of the chip manufacturing, which is so crucial to both jobs and national security issues, to onshore more of that processing. They have a very constant fixed demand, and they can't be as flexible. So we've got to look for opportunities that other load that can participate in that way can do so, and coming up with the appropriate market mechanisms in place to provide the right kind of incentives and provide the right kind of revenues to recognize the willingness to do that.
Thank you. And part of the challenge of meeting this new demand is certainly interconnecting new resources. So what changes have you made to your interconnection process, and have they been working?
So we have reformed our interconnection process really 3 times over the last 6 years. Most recently, the reform process culminated in our filing. We mentioned, I think the gentleman from New Jersey mentioned FERC Order 2023. We have issued and filed our compliance filing to be completely compliant with that new rulemaking from FERC, and we have initiated our transition cluster that does the combined study of all the resources in that mix. We have the largest interconnection queue that we've ever seen at the New York ISO, and we're proceeding along a timeline that will allow us to finish it quicker than we ever have.
Thank you. And if the overwhelming majority of projects in the queue today are battery and solar and wind projects, is it fair to say these technologies are important to future reliability in New York?
I would clarify that the entirety of the New York ISO queue is wind, solar, and storage. So it's crucial that we bring these resources online, that we locate them and site them at the right location so they maximize the benefit and reliability of the system, and we come up with the necessary upgrades, including transmission expansion, that would enable their reliable operation, yes.
There's been much talk in Congress about repealing federal tax energy incentives like the ITC and PTC through the reconciliation process. If those credits were to disappear, I think it's pretty safe to assume it will be, a huge implication for the wholesale market. Project developers may need to bid into the energy market at higher prices to make their projects economically viable. Capacity payments may need to be higher to introduce or to induce a stronger investment signal if fewer projects are going to be developed. So, Mr. Dewey, I realize you may not have done independent analyses on this issue yet. Maybe you could just talk in hypotheticals. Does what I'm suggesting check out? What could be the impact on energy prices and investments in the ISO market if these tax incentives go away?
In a hypothetical sense, I would expect that some of the viability of these projects generally would come into question based on the financing arrangements that they have to develop and construct them. At a minimum, I would anticipate higher costs when they come interconnect into the system, which would ultimately result in higher costs passed down to consumers.
And we know that there have been considerable confusion about how tariffs on Canadian energy might affect New York's electricity. Our systems are interconnected, and New York has long benefited from that importation of clean, reliable Canadian hydropower. We also know that Ontario has considered imposing a surcharge on its electricity exports. How is the ISO prepared for the possible imposition of tariffs and export charges on Canadian power?
I would say that the interconnection between New York ISO and really the whole northeastern United States and Canada is mutually beneficial from both a reliability and an economic standpoint. And I say mutually beneficial because it works both ways across the border with tremendous benefits throughout the region. We have put in mechanisms to collect and remit those tariffs if we need to. And we're working closely from a reliability standpoint to make sure that, at least on an emergency basis, but hopefully on an economic day-to-day basis, that power will continue to flow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida's 15th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today to testify. As our energy demand continues to rise due to growth in manufacturing, advances in technology like artificial intelligence, and increasing electrification, it is critical that our electricity production and transmission are prepared to meet these needs. Alarmingly, in their 2024 long-term reliability assessment, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation found that most of the continent is at risk of experiencing electricity shortfalls within the next 5 years. Considering these developments, I look forward to speaking with our witnesses who represent regional grid operators from across the country on how we can best strengthen our electric grid, prevent shortfalls, and meet this growing demand for power. Mr. Van Wheely, in your testimony, you mentioned that independent system operators and states play a joint and complementary role in resource adequacy. I am interested in discussing further the role that state policies can have on reliability and affordability of the electric grid. The Trump administration recently discussed moving forward with building natural gas pipelines across New York and into New England to help supply energy to that region. What would additional natural gas capacity mean for reliability in the New England area, and what impact do you see winter weather conditions having on consumer demand for natural gas?
So I'll start at the end of your question, which is New England, excuse me, has lived with a natural gas pipeline constraint for 20 years. So we know what happens. When it gets cold, we'll switch to burning other stored fuels, typically oil and imported LNG. So the question, with regard to the benefits of relieving that pipeline constraint, clearly the region recognizes, and I think the states understand that additional pipeline capacity would be beneficial, but they have made very distinct policy choices over the last several decades to work around that issue. So there are workarounds, but ultimately this decision about fuel infrastructure is really in the state's hands.
And if you would tell me about some of those workarounds, and as lawmakers seek to address the growing electric demand, what factors are the most important for them to be considering?
I think in New England, what policymakers are generally doing is trying to weigh affordability versus decarbonization objectives. And so as they think about the relative weight of those two objectives, they tend to steer the policies in one direction or the other.
Now, in my home state of Florida, a recent report from Tampa Electric found that 70,000 Florida businesses are directly fueled by natural gas. Would more natural gas capacity drive investments into economic development projects, like manufacturing facilities, that require significant amounts of affordable energy?
I think it's there's a complex answer to a simple question, in the sense that ultimately to build new gas infrastructure into New England, you need to have a custom for that. So the pipelines will not build on speculatively. They need customers to do this. And ultimately, the customer decision rests with the states ultimately. And we've had this conversation about a decade ago. So I think the prevailing policy wisdom has been to rely on stored fuels and imported LNG. I think the conversation is starting to turn to whether or not it makes sense to relieve those constraints directly.
Thank you. And Mr. Astana, you mentioned in your testimony that PJM facilitates the transfer of power to and from interconnected neighboring systems, including the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator and the Southwest Power Pool, to help meet electricity demands. Can you elaborate on how PJM works with neighboring jurisdictions to coordinate operations?
Yeah, thank you. We have joint operating agreements with our neighbors. So when we export to the Southwest Power Pool, they're not an immediate neighbor. We go through the Midwest ISO, but particularly with the Midwest ISO and with New York, we're continuously coordinating power flows back and forth. And then with Duke in the Carolinas and with TVA also, sort of all day our operators are talking and coordinating between our systems, because our systems impact each other. It's actually one big electrical system, and so you do have to coordinate at the seams.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas's 33rd District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody knows, and it's been briefly talked about, Mr. Vegas knows this very well, that Texas is growing very, very rapidly. We're having record-setting growth. We're also having record-setting heat. And every now and then we'll have some record-setting cold. And demand is likely to continue growing. And as I stated in our last hearing in the subcommittee, ERCOT does a great job in enabling new generation in its interconnection process. And to its credit, ERCOT vastly outpaces other regions in bringing new generation online, but that's only part of the question. We are constrained by our grid infrastructure, and our failure to invest in grid infrastructure is a threat to our economic and national security, and unfortunately, I don't think that we're doing enough. There's been a lot of talk today about generation and load growth, and rightly so. But today I would like to hear from Mr. Vegas about a couple of other things focusing on Texas and our grid, and that's ERCOT's transmission planning and its demand response initiatives. Mr. Vegas, how is ERCOT considering transmission planning given ongoing congestion issues around the state?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Transmission planning is absolutely one of the critical legs of the stool to ensuring the reliability, resiliency, and to enable the growth that we've been talking about. We have recently actually published a new regional transmission plan which lays out what the grid in ERCOT needs over the next 10 years, and it has new elements in it. Today, the ERCOT transmission system operates at a peak of 345,000 volts. We have laid out a plan that continues that strategy, but also one that adds a new extra high voltage network at 765,000 volts. That is helping to address the large power flows that are going to have to move around the state, helps with congestion management, could eliminate a lot of the congestion constraints that we have, and will support the kind of growth that we're talking about.
Yeah. I also want to ask you too, when we had the Winter Storm Uri that, we were, 1 minute and 30 seconds away from the entire grid crashing down. One of the things that hasn't been talked enough about that I think that we should talk more about is the winterization of Texas infrastructure. We saw failures in both renewable and natural gas components during that storm. And I wanted to ask you, in a state like Texas, it would be fairly inexpensive to do things like winterize, wind turbine blades, but you wouldn't want to spend a lot of money in closing, for instance, outdoor, gas facilities and things like that. That could end up being very, very costly. In a state like Texas, what can they do to protect those larger, older platforms that are going to be much, much tougher to winterize?
Yeah, the kind of tactics that they're using are putting in windbreaks, putting in thermal heaters near where there's critical components, valves, compressors, elements that when they're exposed to the wind typically are the ones that are at highest risk. Historically, Texas has always been weatherized their system for the heat of the hot summer so that they could run. And so enclosing was never really a strategy. So now that we're seeing more significant cold winter weather, what we need to do is deal with the changes that brings in, and that's what they're doing to those gas plants as well as to the natural gas facilities, is managing the wind chills through weather breaks and things like that.
If we have another storm like Uri next winter, has enough already been done to prevent those older, larger platforms from crashing again?
I think the weatherization measures we have in place today are very good. During any extreme weather event, there is always a risk of impact. Remember, these are 40, 50, 60-year-old machines that we're talking about. They do fail under duress and extreme conditions, but we are much better prepared today than we were during Winter Storm Uri.
And also, too, I want to just ask you very briefly in the last remaining seconds here. Everybody's always concerned about reliability and affordability, and not just the large industrial loads that we talk a lot about here. What strategies are being implemented to increase demand response participation among residential and small business customers?
Thank you for that question. We actually have initiated a strategic program this year to initiate a new consumer residential demand response program that is going to be financially supported by ERCOT. That work is going to be done in conjunction with the Public Utility Commission, and our goal is to have that meaningfully advanced throughout this year and available for residential consumers soon. I'd like to also add, we do have good residential programs in place today, but we want to grow them even further.
Right.
I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas's. No, I just this way. No, we're heading that way. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. We have the gentleman from Texas for the next 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all very much for being here and for your time. Mr. Vegas, just for the record, so everyone knows, you were not there during Winter Storm Uri.
That's correct.
And have done a remarkable job since then. ERCOT has, the entire team has, the entire new team that's been put there. It was a perfect storm. It was extremely unique, as people said, a 100-year storm. And just for the record as well, have you all had to shed load at all or request a shedding of load in the state of Texas since you've been in power?
No, we have not.
Thank you very much. I kind of rest my case with that. Is my opinion, there certainly was human error involved during the record storm, and I just want to thank you for your leadership and all of ERCOT for what you've been able to accomplish and do in the last several years. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, I'll turn a little bit of the panel. Mr. Asna, you talked about permitting reform. What reform needs to happen in permitting? And I'm sorry if these questions have been asked. We here at the end get the very last questions, and so I'm sorry if that was asked earlier. But if you don't mind, what kind of reforms need to be put in for permitting?
Yeah, I mean, there was bipartisan permitting reform that was being advanced in Congress before, and we were supportive of that. But I think the broader point is it is taking too long to build new generation and very difficult to build new transmission. And there are good reasons for that. And people don't want large infrastructure on their property and near them, and we need to respect that. But I think we're going to have to solve this issue. And I think giving authority and there are various bodies you could give authority to, but giving centralized authority to approve permitting, I think is one idea.
So does something like the nuclear modular reactors, does that excite you or concern you?
I think it's exciting. It's definitely exciting.
Good, okay. Mr. Van Weel, you said there was new supply coming online. What type of new supply is coming online in your area?
Well, so the proposed new supply was offshore wind. So as I mentioned in my testimony, given...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said the new supply is wind coming online?
Offshore wind, yeah.
Offshore wind. Yeah. What happens if the wind doesn't blow?
I think the region is going to have to, well, your question is whether the wind doesn't blow or whether the offshore wind comes online.
So you said the new generation is offshore wind coming online.
Right, yeah.
What happens if the offshore wind doesn't blow?
I think you have to have enough resource on the system to back that up.
So do you have enough? Will you have enough? If
Yes.
that's the new coming online, what's the backup to that if the wind doesn't blow?
Well, so the good thing about offshore wind in the wintertime, it actually helps with the gas constraint that we have on the system because the wind profiles in the winter are actually quite favorable. So it helps displace the use of stored fuels. Of course, there will be times when offshore wind does not blow, and at those times you have to depend on other resources like natural gas or oil resources.
Do you have enough natural gas?
So with now modeling, we have enough in combination with the offshore wind to make it work
Right now.
right now. Yeah.
So what's the solution moving forward?
And the solution moving forward is that the region is going to have to deal with this energy constraint. Really comes down to storage of energy in some form. The question is, what does that look like? Or you could solve this problem through moving to other technologies like small modular reactors. So there's a variety of options, and the states are going to have to think about where they want to steer policy to address this over time.
And what's your personal position on the modular reactors?
I'm in favor of them.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel, very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California's 50th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to step out a little bit, but I didn't hear, and I don't think there's been probably any discussion whatsoever of conservation as part of this conversation. The idea that we don't even think about not burning energy as part of this approach to supply, I think we're letting it get away from us. And in fact, this week, what we're voting on, the business of the House of Representatives, is to overturn efficiency standards for refrigeration that would help us save energy and make us have to produce that much less energy. And I just think it's crazy. The other thing I still recommend and still interested in is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which is a way to price carbon and then return the dividends to people so that their overall tax burden doesn't go higher, but they have an incentive to conserve energy. We should provide that incentive from every economic decision maker in the economy, from a household to the biggest corporation. It just makes sense to me as we face a challenge which is really unprecedented. I certainly think we ought to build everything we can. We ought to build as much generation and its transmission as we can. And for years I've said, I've sounded the alarm that our energy grid is too small, it's too old, and it's dumb, and we have to do better. But the construction of new high-voltage transmission in the U.S., which allow us to send energy from where it's abundant to where it's needed, has slowed to a trickle. In 2023, we built just 55 miles of new high-voltage transmission. At our current pace, we will build, in this decade, a fifth of the transmission we did a decade ago. The truth is that building big projects in America has become extraordinarily difficult. Our agencies don't have enough people or funding to permit these projects in a timely manner. Large-scale projects also face litigation, complex environmental review, bureaucratic delays, and we all ought to be about fixing that. And certainly this committee knows that I've been working on permitting reform to the displeasure of some of the incumbents on the environmental side, because we have to get this done. But I think conservation ought to be something that we think about as well. Let me just ask, Mr. Asana, you were asked for some specifics on permitting reform. I'm going to just say what I'd ask for all of you, and maybe you could provide this in writing, is if your companies have experiences that they have, you can go to your lawyers about this if you need to. But if you've got experiences that this committee should understand that you think don't make any sense, that can be improved, if you have specific recommendations on laws that can be changed, I would love to hear them. I think we're ready for that here, and I think all of the above means all of the above. Credit to Texas, by the way, which has the closest thing to a free market in energy that we have. They're building more wind than anybody, and because that's what the market demands, and good for them. They deserve our congratulations, and I think in some ways we could learn some lessons from them. Mr. Mainzer, I know in California we've been working hard on interconnection as a priority for years. California's added 20 gigawatts of new resources, 11 gigawatts of storage while investing in transmission. Can you talk about how grid capacity is a barrier to getting new resources on the grid, and how CAISO's trying to interconnect in smarter ways that we might learn from here?
Absolutely, thank you, Congressman. So we've also been, just last year, submitted a very significant package of reforms to our interconnection queuing process to FERC. They were fully approved. We've already put them into place. Last fall, we've seen a 67% reduction in requests in a queue in our current cluster. So we are absolutely taking friction out of the system there. We need to keep moving, we need to keep going, and that process is grounded in the coordination that we have with the state agencies to onboard up to 85 gigawatts of new resources over the next decade.
I put forward a number of bills to help efficiently plan and permit transmission projects. One of them is my Bipartisan Speed and Reliability Act, which streamlines permitting for lines that significantly relieve grid congestion and improve reliability. Ms. Curran, you say in your testimony that approving and building new high-voltage transmission lines is a complex and lengthy process. Congratulations on that. That's well stated. But maybe you could give me a little bit of color on that. What do you find is a challenge for you, and what's the complexity you think doesn't need to be so complex?
Sure. So really, I think about the length of time and the complexity in three phases. First planning, then permitting, then actually building it. And the role of the ISO is really on the side of the planning. We have been successful in taking an approach where we look at multiple values for transmission, not just economic, but also reliability, also enabling whatever those state or member needs are, and have gotten a fair amount of transmission built. Our states have really leaned in on the permitting questions, but we've also made decisions like trying to utilize existing transmission. The key in our world is who pays for it. And so having a business case that shows benefits well in excess of cost has been, I think, the secret to getting that transmission approved.
Great. Okay, well, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I would ask that I be permitted to ask that those questions be submitted to the record, answers on specific ideas from the operators on permit reform. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Dakota for 5 minutes for questions.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I have said to a few of you that this panel is the most powerful panel of people in our whole country. And I mean that sincerely, because at this table, and I hope my colleagues appreciate just how much experience, technical expertise exists at this table, you have the power to pretty much bring us all to our knees, shut our whole country down. So thank you for everything that you do every day to keep our economy going and our communities safe. So a couple questions I'd like to dig into here. First of all, are government incentives affecting what types of resources are coming into the market, getting into the queue? And if you could each just kind of say, like, either in your view, in your market, the impact that the government incentives are having on what resources come would be either significant, modest, minimal, or any qualification you want to say. Starting with you, Mr. Asmana.
Yeah, I would say they're significant, and the incentives from the federal government are significant, and then our states different states have different incentives that make a difference as well.
Okay,
I'd agree with that point.
significant,
Significant, yes, state and federal.
excellent.
Yes, also significant. We've seen over a number of years that depending on what the incentive is, the makeup of our queue and the volume of generation in it does change fairly dramatically.
Okay,
It's a very significant driver in New York, yes.
okay.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. Significant.
I would probably characterize it as modest to significant only because the major driver of our queue is really state policy at this particular juncture. So, but it's certainly an impact.
And in Texas, it's a significant impact as well.
Okay, and so across the board, significant, and state policy also being significant. What I didn't hear, or what I think is missing in there, is that it's market forces that's driving what comes to into the queue, or even like the demand, what you need, what the markets need, doesn't seem to be factoring in there. That, to me, is a pretty significant problem that we all ought to be thinking about moving forward. There's a lot of talk about costs and, what's low cost, everyone wants low cost, everyone wants to keep the costs down for consumers. Mr. Nichols and SPP, and I'm going to ask Ms. Curran too, and MISO, what costs are often not included in this calculation of different comparisons between fuel, in terms of their total costs to the grid? What costs are not included in that often, in your opinion?
I think that, the cost of reliability risk are often not included. We know from Winter Storm Uri, at least reports have indicated $200 billion plus of cost just as a result of that one event. And I think we oftentimes too quickly forget about the cost of not being able to provide reliable electric service. We think all too often about the cost of investment.
Yeah.
The cost to invest new transmission, the cost to invest new generation. We forget about the benefits of resilience, and we forget about the cost of not having reliable service.
Okay, very good. And Ms. Curran, I'm going to skip you for now and ask everybody one quick question. If you could tell us, if you could pick one thing, I know there's many things you've highlighted today that you want us to take away, but what's the one thing, if you could pick one thing we need to correct to meet and maintain reliability, meet the demand? What is the sort of one thing you would say we need to do quickly or first?
I think hang on to the generation that we have already to start with.
I'll add the paying attention to the gas-electric interdependency because we need to view this as one system, not separate systems.
Excellent.
I will also say, hold on to the generation we have, slow down those retirements of existing units.
I would say hold on to the generation, but also make sure that the market signals and the development of the markets align with the type of reliability attributes that you need so we attract the right kind of investment.
Excellent.
Only because I want to be a little different.
It's okay to be the same, Lanny.
I think we need to more effectively use the grid we already have.
Okay.
I would say we want to ensure we have strong accountability mechanisms for resource adequacy.
I agree with all of my peers, and I would just add incentivizing reliability discreetly and explicitly would be very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you all. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired and yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts 4th District. 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin the questions, I do want to dig into the concept of the market for energy production, because Democrats actually really agree. We want competition in the market for energy generation because, as the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, said earlier, different types of generation portfolios make sense in different states, and we want low cost and reliability to be rewarded, which is why we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which said, one, there's an overall negative externality associated with fossil fuel emitting types of generation, and so we're going to issue a tech-neutral tax credit to all clean sources of generation that don't have greenhouse gas emissions, which have a negative externality, but we're not going to pick winners or losers in that form of clean energy generation. It was
The IRA was a energy pro-market piece of legislation. And it is in fact the Trump administration who is picking winners and losers and distorting energy markets. They're doing so with tariffs on electricity from Canada. They're doing so by canceling offshore wind contracts, despite the fact that in some states, offshore wind is an important part of that generation portfolio. They're doing so by trying to get fossil fuels to jump the queue. So when we talk about energy markets, it is Democrats who are supporting well-functioning energy markets, and it's the Trump administration that's impairing them. Let's talk now about how this is affecting Massachusetts, Mr. Van Welle. First of all, tariffs. New England is a net importer of electricity, correct?
Correct.
And we get that from Canada?
And from New York.
But New York gets some from Canada, too.
Correct.
Now, under Chapter 27 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, electrical energy is identified as a good but has a, quote, free tariff designation and is not subject to the border entry procedures through which custom duties are imposed. Public statements have suggested that it would not be tariffed, but do you know?
We do not know. We have asserted what you have just said, but we have also put in a backstop, which is to ask the FERC to give us the permission to allocate the cost if we need to collect those monies.
And what is the cost of that uncertainty to New England ratepayers?
It depends on the level of the tariffs. At the level of 25%, there's probably of the order of about $160 million a year.
And even the uncertainty is impairing your ability to run the grid?
Not at this point. So tariffs, will affect price in some way. It shouldn't affect reliability
But are you having to spend resources and time on figuring out how you would levy that tariff?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and that has an indirect cost. Let's talk about our reliance on liquefied natural gas. That is our sort of swing winter source of energy, yes?
Correct.
And it comes mostly from Trinidad and Tobago?
Correct.
The Everett Port Terminal?
Correct.
And it's subject to global spot prices.
Well, I would say there's another major import point for New England, which is the St. John Terminal in New Brunswick. Between
those two.
terminal and Everett is where the gas comes.
But it's subject to the spot price globally, right, that LNG?
Correct.
So Massachusetts is at the whim of global movements in LNG prices, right? So when something exogenous happens, like, I don't know, Russia invades Ukraine, we bear the brunt of higher LNG prices.
That's correct.
So Massachusetts is not in control of its own energy destiny right now.
Correct. I think Massachusetts could do some things to reduce those effects.
And those things could include offshore wind?
And yes, or dual fueling or relieving the gas pipeline constraints.
Let's talk about some of those in the next minute. Offshore wind, as you said, actually the wind does blow in the wintertime pretty consistently, which is exactly when we have that peak LNG demand. And so offshore wind would be very helpful in offsetting our vulnerability to global LNG spot prices. Nuclear, would it help us if we built a nuclear power plant in Massachusetts?
It would, but I think that'll be some time before that would be practically realized.
Well, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now, right?
Yep, I agree.
And then tell me about dual use in our last 30 seconds.
Say again?
Dual use, the dual fueling?
A dual fuel. So that's really to allow, we have some 7,000 megawatts of gas-only resources that cannot access gas from the pipelines when it gets cold. So one way of working around the gas constraint is for the New England states to allow for permitting of dual fueling, which would allow them to switch to fuel oil and utilize that fuel instead of gas.
Thanks for your time and your expert testimony, Mr. Van Welle.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York's 23rd District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dewey, the New York ISO has repeatedly raised strong concerns over our state's aggressive transition away from sources of energy like natural gas and towards, quote, renewables like wind and solar. In a 2023 report, the ISO stated it is important to note that commercially available technologies to provide dispatchable, non-emitting supply do not exist at scale at this time. Does the ISO's definition of dispatchable encompass the ramp-up time for this non-emitting supply mentioned in this and other reports?
Yes, it does. When we talk about dispatchable, emission-free resources, We are projecting the need and the necessity to have a resource that can both meet the state's climate legislation, which mandates a carbon-free electric system by 2040, as well as continuing to meet the dispatchability requirements of managing the grid. That gap, that resource, does not exist today. The technology does not exist today.
What impact does a longer ramp-up time for these sources of generation like wind and solar have on grid reliability in a state, particularly when we experience weather events like Winter Storm Elliott that hit my district in the winter of 2022?
It requires extensive planning. It requires a lot of focused attention on the planning models so that we are not caught surprised by those swings in weather. It requires us to have additional and subsequent resources on standby in case we get those forecasts wrong, so that we can quickly shift to fill in the gap that can sometimes surprise us if it happens too quickly.
Thank you. And as you point out in your testimony today, the 2024 to 2034 RNA directly implicates our state's own public policies and the concerns over declining reliability margins. Specifically, since the enactment of New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, more than twice the capacity of generation has been deactivated than has been added to the system. You go on in your testimony to mention how this transition is raising new challenges for grid reliability in the event of significant weather events. Mr. Dewey, has any oversight been conducted by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission into these reliability concerns voiced by New York ISO? And has FERC given any warning signals to the state of New York based on what seem to be very consistent concerns with reliability resulting from public policy choices?
We've had a lot of engagement and a lot of oversight with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, which is the reliability arm of the FERC. They are predominantly the enforcement arm to make sure reliability criteria is met. We work very closely with them to make sure that the market rules that we develop, that we administer under the FERC tariffs, contemplate some of the changes that we're going to see on the electric power grid. So primarily that engagement is with NERC on reliability, and with FERC on the implementation of the market rules necessary to be able to meet those reliability criteria.
Okay. And on the subject of state-level policy choices impacting reliability and affordability, Mr. Van Wheely, in 2013, you testified before this committee that there were concerns in ISO New England that insufficient natural gas infrastructure would result in increased costs, increased emissions, and reduced reliability. You reiterated your testimony in 2017, and in today's testimony, you've stated that ISO New England gets more than 50% of its electricity from natural gas, yet it doesn't have enough natural gas pipeline capacity in the winter. With this history, Monday's Washington Post reports that electricity costs in New England are 40% more than in the rest of the country. Do you continue to have fuel security concerns? And would additional pipeline capacity sourcing domestic supplies to source sufficient natural gas lower costs for consumers and address fuel security concerns?
So the actions the states have taken in the last decade have mitigated some of the price effects of the gas constraint by essentially taking demand off the system. And they've done that through investment in generation and demand response and energy efficiency. But the long-run concern still is there. And to your point, I think the gas constraints have resulted in big costs every winter when it gets cold, and we've had to rely on LNG or oil. So I think the policy question for the states is how best to mitigate those effects. Their actions have also focused on trying to add offshore wind into the mix, because that would be beneficial. To the extent offshore wind is delayed, I think the conversation will turn to what are the other possibilities. And so the options on the table would be additional pipeline infrastructure, the dual fueling that I mentioned, and I would say one thing Congress could help us with here is the Jones Act. So I saw an article just earlier this week that Puerto Rico is now finally getting domestic LNG shipped to it. It would be helpful if New England could access domestic LNG. We export it at $6 per million BTU, but we're having to import it at $35 to $40 per million BTU. So I think Congress, that's something they could.
I'm sorry, the gentleman's time has expired.
Time has expired. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes, we're on the list here, the gentleman from Ohio's 12th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Your colleague from Ohio. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I do have to, just in case, Mr. Vegas, I don't get to you, I have a question for you, but we miss you in Ohio. Good seeing you. My first question is for Mr. Asana. Excuse me. I'd like to start with you and follow up on a conversation I had with your colleague, Awesome Hawk, during a hearing this subcommittee held earlier this month. PJM's existing installed capacity mix is overwhelmingly made up of dispatchable power generation, such as natural gas, nuclear, and coal. However, as a few days ago, only 5% of the active projects in the PJM queue are thermal generation. Additionally, between 2022 and 2023, PJM saw over 11,000 megawatts of generation deactivated and only 4,000 megawatts of new generation added to the grid. Do you have any concerns with the lack of dispatchable power generation entering PJM's interconnection queue? And are there enough of these projects to offset premature retirements and meet the rising growth demand?
Yes, we do have concerns with the lack of dispatchable generation in the queue, and we have taken significant action to deal with that, including our Reliability Resource Initiative. And I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like.
Thank you. FERC recently approved PJM's Reliability Resource Initiative, or RI, to allow shovel-ready projects that enhance a grid reliability to get built and connected to the grid as quickly as possible. So I do want you to expand on it a little bit. PJM recently announced that the RRI received 94 applications, totaling over 26 gigawatts of nameplate capacity. Mr. Astana, I understand PJM is actively reviewing these applications. Can you discuss how you will score or weigh these projects to ensure they'll get built and online as quickly as possible?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative. So our goal with this initiative was to get shovel-ready projects that had certain attributes, and those attributes were really reliability supporting attributes. We're really excited that we've gotten almost 2x subscription of this opportunity, 27 gigawatts almost, and now we're scoring them. We're scoring them based on a 100-point scale based on criteria like ELCC and UCAP, which are technical terms for just firmness and reliability support. Also on viability and project support and things like location. So if projects are located in a more constrained area, they will get extra points. So there's a set of criteria, adds up to 100 points, and we're looking for viability, constructability, how quickly they can come online, and how much they can support the reliability of the grid.
Okay, a follow-up to that is how can grid operators, FERC, and Congress build off this initiative to get more generation built and connected?
Yeah, I'm happy to ask my colleagues here. I know we've all talked about this, and some other systems are considering similar initiatives, but I think it's really important when we're facing a problem without a clear solution, which is generators are retiring, we need to serve more load, that we be creative and come up with ways to fill the pipeline with the type of generators that will serve that load. And that's what we're trying to do with this initiative. And we're happy to share our experience with others.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vegas, I did have time for you, but it's also for Asana, but I would like Mr. Vegas to go first. Last year, PJM, ERCOT, SPP, and MISO jointly filed an amicus brief with the D.C. Circuit Court against the Biden EPA's Clean Power Plan 2.0. I'm extremely grateful that just a few weeks ago, Administrator Zeldin announced the EPA will be reconsidering the Clean Power Plan 2.0, along with dozens of other Biden-era rules and regulations. Since I'm limited on time, Mr. Asana and Mr. Vegas, you go first. If the Clean Power Plan 2.0 were to remain in effect, would your service territories see an increased risk of rolling brownouts and blackouts?
Yes, that plan had risked more than 14,000 megawatts of existing coal plants that are serving the grid today. They would be at risk, and that would be a significant reliability concern.
Thank you very much. Mr. Asana.
Yes, that plan would have increased the reliability risk and will in our region if it goes forward.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, and just let everyone know they did just call votes. We see how many we can get through. We still have about 6 members that are still on the list, and so at this time we're going to go to the gentleman from Colorado. for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you, of course, to the witnesses for coming today. Mr. Nickel, my first question will be to you. We've heard a lot of conversation today about how we need more power, and I don't know that I've fully wrapped my mind around some of the nuances that I'm sure you're much more familiar with, particularly when it comes to power versus dispatchable power and things like cost efficiency versus reliability in terms of actually obtaining that power. And so what I mean by that is I've been on the floor for some of my largest electric utility providers in Colorado, where they're talking about not just what is currently powering the grid, but looking forward into the future in terms of weather reporting to figure out what's the weather going to be. Is the wind going to be blowing? Is the sun going to be shining? Where is not only the affordable power going to come from or forecasted to come from in the next couple of hours to days, but is it the most cost efficient? Is it the most reliable? So can you just speak a little bit to the complexities of managing a grid, understanding that not all power is created equal, and drawing some of the distinctions between the dispatchable power and the variable power, and also the most affordable power versus the most reliable power?
Sure, and thank you for the question. It's a difficult question to answer, but I'll do my best. So when I think of dispatchable power, that's generation that has fuel that can be stored. It's not weather dependent. And so gas, for example, is a primary source of dispatchable generation today in SPP's footprint, as is coal generation. Nuclear as well is a dispatchable, although not as quickly dispatchable as gas and coal. So when we have weather-dependent situations on the grid, we have to depend on dispatchable generation to show up in order to deal with that intermittent nature of renewable generation. I'll give you an example. On June 6th of 2024, last year, out of 32,000 megawatts of nameplate wind capacity, only 100 megawatts were produced. 100 divided by 32,000 megawatts is a really small number. It's practically zero, and that's across 14 states in the middle part of America where wind is supposed to be at its strongest potential. So we have to have dispatchable generation that has fuel available to be able to offset the fact that that wind generation didn't show up.
So in that space, we talked about the dispatchability and the reliability. Can you also speak to the affordability? I'm from a state that does wholesale power, and so I've had conversations with the folks that are looking to the next 24 hours, the next 72 hours for those bulk power purchases. Can you speak to the end impact for the consumer in terms of not only the reliability, but the affordability in looking at the power mix that's going to supply the grid?
So affordability comes into play, one, at the state level. For SPP, we still have vertically integrated utilities, and the state regulators have jurisdiction over the affordability equation. I will say that if, for example, a power plant that's a wind generator only gets a certain amount of capacity credit, and for example, it only, let's say on average is about 20%, a gas generator gets about 90% capacity credit, it would take 5 times as much, nearly, of wind generation to offset the cost of a single gas plant. So that's the equation, that's the cost equation that each of our utilities and their states have to manage in order to figure out what's the most affordable plan going forward to serve demand.
So to your previous example where you're talking about 32,000 megawatts of wind generation, and you've seen that dip down to 100 megawatts of wind generation, you still got to be able to fuel the grid.
That's right.
Is it more or less expensive in those situations to have to go get power from a dispatchable source versus from a 32,000 megawatt facility that at that particular moment is only producing 100?
Well, it's not a matter of affordability at that point. It's a matter of keeping the lights on. So you have no other choice but to use what is available, what's actually already been paid for by the ratepayers in the footprint. So it's at that point, it's not a matter of affordability. It's a matter of reliability.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
the gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for 2 minutes, or 5 minutes for questions. And again, we're about 5 minutes into votes right now. I'm sorry, I guess they had the order wrong on my sheet. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
First, I want to thank Chairman Latta for allowing me to wave on to this important hearing. When it comes to energy production, all energy is not created equal. The capacity factors of wind and solar are simply too small to provide the reliable energy that our grid requires today. What we need in plain terms is more baseload generation. We need more coal, more gas, and more nuclear. It does not matter how many gigawatts of wind and solar capacity are built if they are not generating them when you need them. Unfortunately, we are doing worse than not building dispatchable generation. We're actually retiring it. We're shutting it down. PJM, and I thank you for testifying here today, is the nation's largest RTO and includes my district in Pennsylvania. PJM released a report in 2023 projecting 40 gigawatts of reliable dispatchable generation will retire by 2030. Roughly 25% of the system's installed capacity at that time. PJM labels the majority of these retirements as policy-driven decisions. This is a time when demand is actually growing. Pennsylvania is in a great position to benefit from the investment in jobs of the AI revolution. But we need to have the energy available to build it. With Microsoft and Amazon poised to build co-located data centers in Pennsylvania, we need to steady the ship. We need to encourage investment to unleash the energy that is underneath the feet of my constituents. Mr. Astana, do you agree with me that we need more dispatchable generation built within PJM?
Yes, very much so.
Mr. Astana, PJM has a variety of tools to incentivize building new generation, and I'm encouraged by the success of the Reliability Resource Initiative. But it is a one-time fix, and the potential 26.6 gigawatts of additional power is simply not enough. Holding consistent capacity auctions are critical to providing long-term solutions for the PJM market. Do you believe that the capacity auctions are working to incentivize building and retaining that generation? And if not, how can it be changed to attract new investment?
Yes, we are seeing the capacity auctions work. So we have seen multiple generators withdraw their retirement notices, for example. We've seen a nuclear power plant, the Crane Clean Energy Center, 835 megawatts, announced that it's coming back. Homer City in Pennsylvania, the plant was demolished, but they're looking at repowering, using that site to build a very large gas generator. And while the capacity market isn't the only reason, it is definitely setting the stage for these decisions. Now, I think the challenge that we're facing looking forward is that there is a big backlog for turbines. And so there's a big price premium for turbines. And so the price that the capacity market will have to send to incent new generation that's not already beyond what's in the queue already is going to be really high. And I think it's going to create affordability issues that we're going to have to deal with.
Mr. Astana, I'm concerned that PJM gave in to political pressure of some of the governors of its member states. And this is a very distressing precedent. What are the dangers of governors in the future influencing PJM's market to score short-term political points?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We did have fairly bipartisan support for instituting, I think, a short-term price cap. That's what you're referring to. We had 11 of our 13 states write to us and support that, and 5 governors. But I do think it's important to let our markets work, and we're going to have to make sure that we really allow that in the future.
I think that the path that PJM currently is on is unsustainable. When some member states shut down baseload power plants and others harm investment in new generation, this is creating a situation that will make the grid unstable. If this continues, there will be blackouts during extreme weather events, and my concern is that this will ultimately cost human lives.
I thank you, Chairman Latta, for holding this important hearing and allowing me to waive on. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back the balance of time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to wave on. I'll be very brief. Thank all of y'all for being here. This is extremely important, particularly to the state of Georgia. 11 years in a row, #1 state in which to do business. We have over 50 major data centers. So as you can see, we have a great need for electricity. We are very blessed to have providers in our state who have Georgia Power, Oglethorpe Power, have invested in a nuclear reactor, so that's very important, but delivery of that is extremely important too. So in the brief time that I want to ask you just a couple of questions, and I'll go to you, Mr. Nickel. I'll ask you, tell me about the permitting process, because that's one thing that we really want to concentrate on in this administration and in this session and this Congress is the permitting. I don't care what sector of our economy you're talking about, whether you're talking about energy, whether you're talking about healthcare, technology. I have people in my office all the time, permitting, regulations, crushing us, all the same. So tell me about that.
So I think a bipartisan permitting process is absolutely fundamental and critical to support a quicker buildup of the resources and the transmission infrastructure that we need. We hear all the time about how projects have been slowed down because they can't get built for a various number of reasons. And I think that's the #1 problem that we have that we have to deal with in order to speed up the construction of the actual infrastructure that we need.
Mr. Curran, would you have an opinion on that as well? Ms. Curran, I'm sorry.
It's fine. I think it is the same kind of answer. We have seen good work in our states to accelerate permitting, particularly of transmission lines, but there are still a number of roadblocks that we run into. We recently had a transmission line go into service after, I think it was about 13 years after approval due to permitting issues.
Great. Again, thank all of you for being here. This is extremely important, and we appreciate your attention to it. Now I yield back, Mr.
I
Chairman.
thank the gentleman for yield back. And seeing no other members wishing to ask questions, I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today. Members have 10 additional questions, or may have additional questions for you. I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to submit their responses within 10 business days upon the receipt of the questions. I also ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, so ordered. And without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned. And I want to again thank our witnesses for their excellent testimony today.